Vamos a comenzar esta cuarta sesión de la reunión de
I'm
hoy.
sorry, we're
Los
going to
REDSE
start,
y la prevención
we're
de la
going to
contaminación,
continue
cómo
how to
optimizar
prevent
la presentación de
pollution, how
informes
to
sobre medidas para
optimize
prevenir la contaminación,
reporting
de
to
modo que la
reduce
información resulte
um,
de mayor utilidad.
pollution so
Y está,
the data can be
eh,
used
va a estar a
more
cargo mi colega
accurately.
Daniel Valé y también
Daniel
Elizabeth
Valle
Campos,
and
también
Elizabeth
colegas de la
Campos
unidad
will be
de calidad
presenting.
ambiental en la
They are
comisión.
members of
Solo quisiera
the
hacer un
environmental
comentario
unit in the
sobre cómo
commission.
llegamos aquí
And I would like to
en
comment
este
how we
tema en
got to
particular.
this point or to
Y
this topic in particular.
en el 2014
In
tuvimos una
2014,
reunión como esta
we
aquí en
attended
México
a similar meeting in
y
Mexico,
precisamente
and
eh,
actually,
el ingeniero Alejandro Sosa
Mr. Alejandro
en
Sosa
aquel entonces mencionó
mentioned,
cómo podemos hacer para
what can we do,
que
or
tengamos
asked, what can
información
we do
sobre las acciones que se
to
están
get
haciendo para prevenir la
data
contaminación
to prevent
en
pollution
los diferentes sectores.
in the
¿Cómo
different
podemos aprender el
sectors?
uno del otro?
How can we learn from each
Y
other?
eso también fue
And
parte
this
de una
was also
recomendación
part
que
of
se hizo
a
en el plan de acción para
recommendation
mejorar
that
la
was
comparabilidad.
provided in the action plan
Y desde ese entonces
to improve
empezamos a ver
compatibility. And
cómo se
we
estaba
started
reportando este tipo
looking
de
at
datos, este
the
tipo de
different
información,
reports and
actividades de
how
prevención de
this
la
data
contaminación por las
was
empresas.
were
Y
reported.
llegamos al día de hoy
And
con
we
ciertos
are now
análisis,
we're here with
con
certain
eh,
analysis,
discusiones y
with
aprendizaje
the discussions and
de
lessons
diferentes
learned
sectores, especialmente la
from
automotriz,
different sectors,
que ha estado
specifically
muy
from
involucrado
the automotive
en,
industry,
en esta área de la prevención
which
de la contaminación. Así que
has been
eh,
involved in
empezamos a hacer los análisis
P2.
y queremos ver ahora
So we
cómo,
started
eh,
conducting analysis,
qué
and
hacemos
now
con la
we want to
información.
know
¿Es
what we do
útil?
with
¿No es
the
útil?
with
¿Cómo se puede
data.
mejorar?
Uh,
¿Cómo la
uh,
podemos mejorar
are data
para
useful?
que sea
How can
de uso y
data
para
be
prevenir la
improved
contaminación? Así
to
que
prevent
con eso le paso la palabra a mi
pollution?
colega
So I would
Daniel
like to
Valé
pass
y luego a
the floor to
Elizabeth.
Daniel and then to Alison.
Okay. I don't think I have anything else to say. I'll pass it right away to Elizabeth Campos. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. My name is Elizabeth Campos. I prepared this presentation in English just in case, Daniel, you want to jump in at any time. I'm very glad to present a little bit about the work that the CEC has been working on, the pollution prevention topic, as Orlando has said. This project is a work in progress, and the report will be finished and available in our webpage around May 2025. So we will have a little bit of an overview, but most importantly, we wanted to set the stage for the presentations that are coming soon about pollution prevention. And we wanted to give you a little bit of spoilers about our findings and what are we working on. So the first phase of this pollution prevention challenge is on the analysis of pollution prevention data for the North American automotive manufacturing sector and its supply chain. If you put the next one, please. Thank you. As Orlando was saying, this project is framed in the action plan for enhancing the comparability of the PRTRs across North America. In our first discussions for this challenge, it was agreed that we will work with the automotive sectors for various reasons. First, this sector has a great economic impact in our region, and it's also highly integrated between their countries. And there are specific original equipment manufacturers who are present in the three jurisdictions, which often lead in innovation and could support improvements across their supply chain. So that's why we decided to focus our first review of P2 information on these sectors. The objectives of the first phase was to gather the information of P2 that each of the program is collecting and understand what kind of information each facility is giving its completeness, its quality, and perhaps to better understand barriers and drivers to implemented pollution prevention activities within the facilities. Moreover, we wanted to assess the reporting themselves and understand its strengths, its weakness, and its areas for improvement. There's a plan for a second phase of the project, which will involve dialoguing with this report with experts from the automotive sectors and with governments to discuss how can we improve or enhance the reporting for pollution prevention within the framework of the PRTR programs. So if you put the next one, please. So very briefly, first we gather the information for the three programs, different from the other type of information for the PRTR reporting. The information for P2 is very heterogeneous and diverse, but we first wanted to know which were the sectors that related directly or indirectly with the automotive sectors. And we found that at least 70 North American industry classification codes within the NICE code system could relate one way or the other to the automotive sectors, and that was around 12,000 facilities. So we had to narrow our scope a little bit more. First, in time also, because the requirements of the P2 reporting in each country have been changing a lot. So the period for 2018 and 2020 was a good period to analyze because there were little changes implemented in those years. And we finally decided to only work with original equipment manufacturers and tier 1 facilities, around 20 NAICS codes in total. And that gave us a more manageable universe of 1,772 facilities to analyze, of which actually only around 32% provided some kind of information of pollution prevention. And it differed between the countries. If you go to the next, please. So as I said, the information gathering in the three countries is very heterogeneous. There's little fields that could be actually comparable. For example, for that period in the Canadian NPRI, the questions were focusing on the implementation of pollution prevention plans and activities. It is worth saying that now the NPRI questionnaire is a substance-based questionnaire, so that has changed. In the case of the Mexican REDSE, the questionnaire is more based on volumes and changes within years, and is also substance-based with little options for the facilities to provide more comments. And the TRI, it has like two sections for this pollution prevention information, and it also relates to volume information, but also to, it gives the facilities the opportunity to provide more information on each activity that they are implementing. And it's also substance-based, a substance-based questionnaire. If you go to the next one, please. Well, as we say, we won't go through the specific difference and how we analyze data, but we wanted to recognize in this forum that the categories that each program provides for classifying each action sometimes or often don't talk about actual prevention at the source, and they talk about general management practice like inventory management or control actions. And some of them do relate to prevention of at the source, like a reduction or substitution of materials, etc. So we are, well, in the report, you are going to see the analysis of this difference between the three reporting. Next one, please. There's also an important difference between the accessibility of the data. Who is this information for? I think it also differs between the three reporting programs. For example, in the Canadian NPRI, there is available, you could you can consult specific pollution prevention programs in their webpage, pollution prevention plans in their webpage. But to access the data of pollution prevention data, you have to access the whole database, and sometimes queries can be challenging. But there's also tools in interactive dashboards where you could consult also the information, although it's not targeted specifically at pollution prevention data. In the case of Mexican REDSE, the information is gathered in the section 5.4 of the COA, and it's considered private information, confidential, because within the questionnaire, facilities have to put information about the processes of their manufacturing facilities, so it's not public. In the case of the TRI, there are specific tools and websites in which anyone can access information on pollution prevention on a substance base or a facility base. So there are interactive dashboards, and people can enter to review information of specific substances or facilities. Next one, please. So only as an example, barriers to reporting, this information is only gathered in NPRI and in the TRI. And it's interesting that in both countries, the first barrier, of course, is that there is an unknown substitute for the toxic substance, so they cannot implement any pollution prevention activities. But there's also, for example, concerns that the quality of the product may change if some actions are implemented. And we also see some restrictions on the capital for implementing new processes. So it's important to see, well, interesting to see that in the two questionnaires, we see similar responses. The next one, please. So without going through all our analysis, what Daniel and I were discussing about understanding possible drivers that promote the reporting of this type of information, we first understand is the compliance information or the compliance driver, because, for example, in some of specific substance, there is a requirement to have pollution prevention plans, depending on the jurisdiction of the facility. There are also drivers related to corporate policies like zero waste policies or different targets on substance and energy conservations. We also see in the comments a lot of information about enhancing the occupational and health and safety of the people that work in these facilities. And we also see information about the requirements of their customers to have implementation of certain sustainability practices. So it's also a matter of reputation and competitiveness. And well, in the case of, for example, the United States, there is something related to the reputation, because those reports are public. And we also see that there is also the influence of other jurisdiction regulation, that a certain facility has business outside North America. They could be implementing more restrictive things related, for example, for the REACH legislation in the European Union, or other substances prohibited list. If you go to the next one, please. So more than discussing our work, because we want for you to read the report first, we wanted to have some questions in the air for the next presentation. How can we know about pollution prevention efforts outside the substances that are being reported in the PRTR? Right now, we don't have any way of doing that. We also saw that there are not strictly a lot of links of what these corporations are reporting in their corporate sustainability reports, and what the facility at the level of facility is reporting yearly in the PRTR reports. who are the intended users of this information? Is it the government? Is it for the public? Is it for the industry? And when we understand who is this intended to be used for, we can understand what information can be most useful and understand how we can improve the reporting of this type of information. And well, the objective is how we can promote more useful information in the reporting and use it to share experience of best practices within this industry and other industries. So, Daniel, if you want to add anything else for me, that's it. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, everybody. Thank you. She did it in record time. We really did want to just give an overview of what we had looked at. So I think that we won't take questions necessarily right now on this assessment that we did. The report will be available actually very soon on our website, and you're welcome to send us questions. But in the interest of time, we just wanted to set the stage for the other presentations that we have in this session. So thank you, and thank you again, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Elizabeth. And well, then we'll continue with the next presentation. Sorry, prevención de la contaminación y economía circular en el sector
Pollution
automotriz.
Prevention and the Circular Economy in the Automotive Sector by Alejandro Sosa, Director of the Automotive Association for Environmental Sustainability, ASA, and Pablo Fernandez from General Motors, President of the Working Group on the Circular Economy for ASA. Thank you very much, both. Please go ahead.
Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por la sonrisa.
Thank you
Gracias por
very
la
much. Thank you for
comida.
that smile.
Realmente
Thank
es
you
un
for the
privilegio estar aquí
beautiful
con
lunch.
ustedes
It's a real
nuevamente.
privilege to be here with
Ya
all of you
tenemos
again.
muchos años de estar
We've been
trabajando dentro de este tema.
working on
Muy
this
brevemente
topic
quiero
for
agradecerles
quite a
a
few
todos
years now, and
porque las
very briefly I want
fotografías
to
salen
thank everybody
buenísimas
because
y
the
esto es
photos are
reflejo no solamente
fantastic,
del ambiente
and
cordial
this
que tenemos,
is
sino también de los retos que tenemos que enfrentar todos
a reflection not
juntos.
only of our cordial
Esta es ASA,
environment
es
and
la Alianza
relationships,
Automotriz
but
para la
that of the fact that
Sustentabilidad
we are dealing with
Ambiental.
common
Es parte del
challenges.
Suppliers
This
Partnership
is
for the
the
Environment,
Alliance,
que
the
está
Automotive
trabajando en Estados
Alliance for
Unidos
Environmental
y que es la única
Sustainability,
organización en
which
México que logra
is
integrar
part
cadena
of
de
a
valor,
larger
invitando a
association
Tier
in the
1
United
y
States,
también,
and it
desde luego, a nuestros
is a
proveedores
tier one
de servicios.
association
Entonces, los
working
retos
along the
los
supply
vamos
chain and the
tomando
value
todos
chain,
en
and we
equipo,
invite,
todos
of course,
juntos.
all our vendors to work with us. So this
Yo
is
voy
really
a contestar
teamwork.
4 preguntas que
I'm
me he
going
hecho en todo
to
este
answer
proceso
4
y lo voy a
questions
hacer
that I've
más o
asked
menos rápido.
myself throughout the
Primero, ¿qué son
process,
los
and I'll do
requisitos
it
de emisiones
relatively
transferentes de
quickly. First of all,
contaminantes
what
y por
are
qué son importantes
PRTRs
para
and
nosotros
why are
como
they so
sector privado?
important for us as a
Antes de
private
ello,
sector?
pues saludo al
Before
gran
I move
papá, el
on,
gran
I want
abuelito de todo
to
esto aquí en México,
salute
que es
the
Luis Sánchez
grandfather
Cataño.
of
En
this
el
work in Mexico,
94, en
Luis Sánchez
1994,
Cataño,
yo
who in
empecé junto con
1994,
un equipo que él
when
formó
I was
en
just
algo que se
starting
llamó el
to work
Grupo
with a team
Nacional
he put
Coordinador, el que
together, which
trataba
was
con
a
un grupo
national coordinator
piloto
group, and they
donde
were
3
working with
países,
a
Egipto,
pilot group
Checoslovaquia y
that
México,
included Egypt,
estaban tratando de
Czechoslovakia,
ver
and
si valía la
Mexico. And
pena
these three
entrarle o
countries
no
were trying to
a
figure it
estos
out if it was
registros de
worthwhile
emisiones. La
to
respuesta fue un sí.
go
Y la
into the
siguiente pregunta fue
PRTRs.
¿por qué
The
entrar a esto
answer
de
was
los
yes.
registros
And the
de
next
emisiones y
question we had to
transferencia
answer was
de
why? Why
contaminantes?
actually
Al
work
principio
in
comenzamos con
PRTR
eso tratando de
programs?
probar que eran
So we started
valiosos
trying
y
to answer
después de
that
inmediato
question, trying to
surgió
prove its
el tema
value.
de si debían ser
And then
obligatorios
the
o
question
no.
came up if these should
Primero
be
se trabajó de
mandatory or
manera
not.
voluntaria
Initially,
entregando los
the work
reportes de
was
las sustancias
voluntary, handing in
y
reports
ahí pues
regarding
me
the substances.
enorgullece
And I am
decirles que
proud to
nosotros,
say
el grupo
that
que yo dirigía en aquel
the group
entonces,
that I was
fuimos
in
de los
charge of
primeros en entregarlo de
back
manera
then was one
voluntaria
of the
dentro del sector
first
privado,
to
lo cual
submit
nos
that
ganó un
report
reconocimiento por
voluntarily in the
parte
private
de
sector,
la
which won
Secretaría de
us a
Medio Ambiente.
recognition from the Ministry of the
Básicamente estamos
Environment.
hablando de transparencia, rendición de cuentas,
We
tomando en
are
consideración
practically
los
talking
riesgos a
about
la salud,
transparency and
al medio
accountability,
ambiente,
considering the
la
risks
planeación
to our health
ambiental
or the
como país, que
environment,
también
then
esto es
environmental
una línea de
planning
corte,
as a country, which
es
here
una
we
línea
have
base,
a cutoff line
los
or
programas de
a
prevención de la
baseline.
contaminación, los riesgos
We
ambientales
see
y
the
la
impact of
economía
this
circular
into
fueron
our
surgiendo
pollution prevention programs,
posteriormente a esto,
environmental
pero
risks,
también el
and the
definición
circular economy,
ambiental de
which
las
all
empresas
came
tiene que
up
ver con esta situación.
eventually, but then the
Nosotros
performance
además
and management of our
empezamos a
environment
preguntarnos, ¿y
in
dónde
the hands
se
of our
alinea
country and our
estratégicamente
companies
con las actividades
are
que
closely
realizamos
related. But we have
como
to look
compañía?
into
Y aquí
the
está, esta es una
activities that we carry
radiografía
out as companies.
del
And here we
diagrama de
have it.
valor que tienen
This
las
is
empresas.
a
Uno de
snapshot
ellos es
of
reducción de
that
costos,
value
por
chart that
supuesto, es
companies
hacer
have
más
available
con
to them. Of
menos,
course, they want to do
evitar desde el
cost
diseño
reduction, do
cuando
more with
nosotros
less
tengamos la
from the
posibilidad de
get-go,
hacerlo,
from the
de
point
que
of
empleemos
design.
una sustancia
Whenever we're
que a la
able
postre
to,
podría ser
we
más
could use a
favorable para el
substance
medio
that
ambiente,
eventually could not
la
be that
reducción de riesgos de
beneficial to
todo
the
tipo,
environment. Then we have to
riesgos a
look
la
at risk
salud, riesgos al
reduction,
medio
risks
ambiente,
of all
riesgos
sorts to human
regulatorios,
health, the
todo
environment,
tipo de riesgos
to
están
regulation.
contemplados
All
allí.
sorts of risks are
El
contemplated
acceso al
here.
mercado, que en este caso acaban de mencionar el
Access
REACH
to the market,
justamente,
someone
y que
just mentioned
de
the
alguna
reach,
manera pone ciertos
and the reach
requisitos que habrá
somehow
que cumplir, que
sets
habrá que
a few of
homologar y que habrá
a
que
set of
trabajar
requirements that need to
regionalmente
be
para que
standardized and
podamos
worked
tener
on
un
regionally
comercio más
so that
ágil y
our
sin
trade
trabas, o
can
por lo
be more
menos
agile
que
and with
sepamos
fewer
qué es lo que tenemos
hindrances,
en mente
at
cada uno de
least
nosotros
so
y
that we know
finalmente
what
nuestra
we're each
reputación.
thinking of. And finally, this impacts our
Traducido en
reputation.
términos de desempeño, es
Translated into
básicamente esto.
performance, this is
Esto
what
es
we
una
get.
curva por el cual
This
una
is the
empresa
curve
va surgiendo, va emergiendo
of
desde el
a
punto
company's
cero,
growth from
que por un lado
zero,
tenemos el eje del
which on
tiempo,
the
por
one
otro lado
hand,
tenemos el
we
eje
have
de
the axis of
desempeño,
time and the
y
axis of
vamos viendo
performance.
diferentes etapas por las
And we
cuales
look
va
at the different
transitando
stages over
conforme va
which this
creciendo la empresa y
company
conforme va tomando
grows
conciencia.
and
El gran salto, el
develops and
gran
becomes
brinco que
aware
se
of
da
itself.
es con los
The
sistemas de
big leap
administración
comes in
ambiental,
with environmental
porque
management
colocan en el mapa de
systems
la
because
empresa
they
algo que
put on
nosotros
the
llamamos
company's
mejora
map
continua.
what we call
Y esta
ongoing
mejora continua
improvement. This
permite que
ongoing
vayamos
improvement
trascendiendo
allows us
paso a
to
paso de manera
transcend
gradual
little
y
by
muy
little and
constante
gradually,
hasta
but
lograr algo que
steadily,
ya es la
until we
cúspide,
achieve
aquel
something
punto
that
que se
is the
vuelve
peak,
asintótico,
that point that
donde estoy
becomes
señalando la madurez
an,
del
an
sistema y
asymptote
que
where we
entonces
look, we
comienza a
have it in a
reflejar
circle, it's
rendimientos
the system
decrecientes
maturity,
y
and then we
las
see
versiones de dinero que hay que
those
invertir son cada vez
reductions.
más altas, hasta que ya no encuentran
However,
una tasa de retorno que
we
sea
reach
atractiva
those
y entonces se
peak
vuelven
high
muy largas.
investments
En ese
that no
momento
longer
se
have
gira
an
la cabeza
attractive
y
return
comienza
on
a verse
investments. That is when we
la
turn to
cadena de
look
valor
elsewhere
y
and
la
we look
manera de
at our
robustecer
value
en
chain. We
términos
look at
de
how to
alcance
strengthen that
estrecho con nuestros
in
proveedores,
terms of
la manera en la que nosotros podemos
our
seguir
scope and how we work
incrementando
with our vendors,
el
with our
desempeño,
suppliers,
pero
and
ya
how
no
we can
tanto
continue to
en
grow our
términos de una
performance, but
sola
not so much
locación,
in terms
sino
of
en
a single
términos de
location
ciclo de
anymore,
vida.
but in terms of our full
¿Qué sustancias
life
debería
cycle.
estar conteniendo el
What
REACH? Hace un
substances
momento
should be included
empezamos a
in
preguntarnos
PRTRs?
cuáles.
We were asking
Cuando
ourselves that
empezamos a
question
elaborar
earlier.
la norma del
When we
registro de
started
emisiones y transferencia de
drafting
contaminantes, el RECHE,
the
la
regulation
primera
for
pregunta que vino a nuestras
the
mentes fue ¿por
PRTR
dónde empezamos?
was,
Y desde luego
where do we
giramos la cabeza
start?
hacia ustedes,
And then
nuestros
we
socios
turned to
comerciales,
you, our
hacia
commercial
Canadá, hacia
partners,
Estados
to Canada
Unidos,
and Mexico
y
and the
aprendimos de lo
US,
que
of
estaban
course.
haciendo cada uno de
And we learned
ustedes.
from what you
Pusimos
were both
unas listas
doing.
preliminares, pero
So
también
we had
dijimos
these
necesitamos
preliminary
cumplir con nuestras
lists, but we
obligaciones
also
como
thought we
país
need
y
to
por eso incluimos
fulfill our
sustancias dentro
obligations
del
as a
convenio de
country, which
Estocolmo,
is why we
de
included
Tokio, Montreal,
substances
Rotterdam,
from
Minamata,
the
entre
agreements
otros.
of
Todo lo que
Stockholm,
teníamos nosotros como
Rotterdam,
obligación lo
Denmark,
incluimos
and many more.
allí.
All the
Más lo que estaba
obligations
ya en la
we had
normatividad
undersigned, we had to
ambiental
include
y desde
everything
luego
related
también
to environmental
incluimos
regulation,
algunas cuestiones
and of course
sectoriales
then
con
included
umbrales de
some
operación,
sector-related
en
issues
fin, criterios de
with
peligrosidad que
operational
nos permitían
thresholds,
incluir o excluir las sustancias, al igual que ustedes tienen sus
factors of
criterios.
risk or
¿Cuál fue
hazard,
el problema?
which allowed us to include
El
other
problema es que
substances
en
and
términos de
create our own
comparabilidad y de
criteria.
homologación,
Now, the problem is that in
pues
terms of
había
standardizing
mucho que hacer.
and
Pero además,
compatibility, we
otra
had a
pregunta
lot
que
to
nos
do.
hacen
But there was an
muy
additional
continuamente
question,
es
and that
si
still
nosotros
comes
hemos
up
atendido
frequently,
este
is
desafío que tenemos
if we have
enfrente.
taken on
Y
board
desde el
this
punto de vista del
challenge.
sector automotriz se ha
From that
atendido,
standpoint, the automotive
tal vez muchos de
sector
ustedes no recuerden,
has
pero yo se los
really
informo porque
leaned
tengo
into
la
the
edad para
challenge.
hacerlo.
And
En
if
México
you're not
teníamos un
aware of this, I
antidetonante
can
que era
tell you
tetretilo de plomo
that in
y
Mexico we
ese
had
tetretilo de
lead
plomo estaba contaminando
tetraethyl,
gravemente a
which
la
was a
población.
substance that was
Eh,
heavily polluting our population. So we had to change what we put into our petrol, our gas. Now we use different substances, and we're trying to work now with vehicles that still use sulfur, and sometimes we just can't cope, and this is why we need everyone's help. We're also working into replacing certain materials. We've attended other sorts of meetings, even in meetings with groups of the CEC. We've had people come in and show us solutions to use other materials, to leverage synergies and different products, and work on things that help prevent pollution, but that also relate to the circular economy. Innovation, recycling, and benchmarking are always top of mind here. In terms of our suppliance partnerships, they have a series of projects that are very relevant and interesting, and right now we're trying to do our own work hand in hand with companies that have experience in this as well. Other challenges that we still have to look forward to are working on the future of fuel. For example, we're going down the path of hydrogen and electric, and we have to look at mobility, which is a shared problem throughout the world, and other problems related to innovation that also link to things that we cannot yet see or understand. As part of this work that we were doing, I took it to myself to study this, which Rolando mentioned earlier. And this is about recycling. And I wondered, recycling and other related activities that are part of the circular economy are showing better and better results. But we can see that it's not just that. We have a reduction in pollutant releases. This is from the toxic release inventory. And we can see that slow decrease that shows results. And I think it looks a lot better in the Taking Stock online website, which is what we just saw earlier. Now, we thought and we said that comparability is very important. So the question is, why weren't we able to have the same PRTR in all three countries? Now, the first way to answer that is respect. Respect for the legislations and regulations already available and enforced in each country. The second answer to that question is the perception that each of our three nations have in terms of what should or should not be in each of our lists, as well as the criteria for inclusion and exclusion and the thresholds. Then in some other meeting that we held in Michoacán, if I remember correctly, we were sitting around the pool with our colleagues from the US and Canada. It was fantastic, but then a situation came up and we were asked, so why don't we have the numbers for emissions or releases from informal labor, informal activities in Mexico, or even what happens to releases from war-related activities or from technologies that are relatively new and whose implications in the future we still don't understand. So there's that watershed moment that we really need to understand, to continue to work on and to standardize with the REACH. And that's close to my conclusion, just to say that releases change in each of our sectors. However, in the automotive industry, our nations become integrated because we complement each other really well. And then in that way, the releases in the sectors change in their importance, however, in each of our countries, and depending on what is available to each of our industries and sectors and our pollutants change. And that has to do with the possibility of including CO2. And we've heard the fantastic news that in
Este
fact, that
esfuerzo
is
no ha
happening.
sido gratuito, este
This
esfuerzo
has
es
not been
largo, ha
easy.
sido
It's
muy
been
constante por parte de la
long and
CCA
continuous
y
efforts
esto es
by the
una lista de
CEC.
las cuestiones que habían dicho
And this
que iban a
was
hacer
one
y
of
hoy
the
finalmente
issues
las
that they
lograron.
were going to
Para
tackle,
concluir,
and we
¿cómo
are
podemos
finally
reducir estos
there. So
contaminantes
to,
en el
to close,
ambiente,
how can
tomando
we
en
reduce our
consideración tanto
pollutants in
prevención
the
como
environment,
el enfoque
taking
de
into
economía
account both
circular?
prevention and the focus
Permítanme
of the
decirles
circular
que necesitamos
economy?
arrancar
Allow me to
como
say
estamos arrancando
that we
y
need
no
to
solamente
start
pensar en la
just as we're
fabricación de
doing
bienes
now and not just
distintos,
think about
sino que
manufacturing different
también
goods,
en la
but also we
concepción
need to
de la
think
forma en la que
about
hacemos negocios.
the
Hay
way in
una
which we
serie
do
de
business.
cuestiones que, bueno, no
There
tengo esa
are
libertad
a
yo
lot of things that I'm not
para platicarlas,
precisely
pero
free to
se vienen
discuss,
cambios
but there are
importantes,
significant
digamos,
changes
en la
coming
concepción de economía
in
circular,
terms of
pero
the
en términos de
circular
productos,
economy.
servicios,
However,
procesos y de
in
modelos
products and
de
services,
negocio, porque todo
processes,
esto
and
tiene que
business
ver con
models,
esto que vemos
it all
aquí,
relates to what
que
we
es
see here,
justamente el
which
círculo de la
is
cadena de valor, cómo se
that
integra,
circle, the
cómo
cycle of
dejamos de
the
ver el
value chain and how
alcance
it's
solamente dentro
incorporated,
de las
how we
empresas y
need to
empezar
look
a ver
beyond the
esto
scope
para
of our
agua en
companies
términos de circularidad. Tenemos
and look
ahorita
at the whole
circularidad en
process.
materiales,
We are
circularidad
looking at
de
this
agua, que es
cycle
este
and
justamente,
circles of water,
círculos
of raw
internos,
materials,
externos,
internally,
simbiosis,
externally,
y
with
con esto es
symbiosis and
parte del
synergies.
futuro que
And this
tenemos
is all part of
enfrente.
the
Ya
future
lo tenemos
that stands
justamente y
before
hoy estamos
us.
elaborando
This
otro
is
para
what
el
we
círculo
have to work with
energético.
now, and we're
Hasta aquí lo dejo,
preparing
me quedo
another one of
hablando.
these charts
Muchísimas
for
gracias
the
por
cycle
la
of
oportunidad
energy. That's it
nuevamente.
for me, Orlando. Thank you very much.
Gracias a ti, Alejandro.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Seguimos a la segunda parte de la presentación y luego.
Let's move on to the second part of our presentation, and then we can have some questions.
Perfecto. Pues bueno, primero que nada, muchas
Great.
gracias
Thank
por
you
estar
very
aquí,
much,
por
firstly, for joining
darme la
us,
oportunidad de
and
resumirles un poquito
secondly,
de
for
qué hacemos
giving
en
me the
General
chance
Motors
to give
en
you
cuanto a economía
a
circular.
quick look at what we're doing at General
En General
Motors in terms
Motors
of the circular
llevamos ya
economy. At
aproximadamente,
General
bueno, más de
Motors, we've
110
been
años
working
de
for over
existencia
110
y en
years.
México llevamos ya
In Mexico, we've
89 años.
been
Y
around
eso
for
pues
89
es un
years,
legado
and that
realmente a
is
lo
quite a
que el
legacy.
compromiso que tenemos
The
aquí en
legacy
el
of our
país, ¿verdad?
commitment to the country.
Hemos logrado ser el
We have
productor número uno
actually
de
be
vehículos
become the
y también el
top
número uno en exportación,
vehicle
en compra a
manufacturer and
proveedores
top
y en distintas
exporter,
otras
and
pues, hitos que nos hacen
we take
no
up that
solo
first
tener
position in many
un
other
gran
fields
emblema, sino
that not
también
only
una
allow
gran
us to be
responsabilidad.
very
Al
proud
ser
of who we are, but it also
claramente
gives
también
us great
una gran
responsibility.
empresa de tal
Of
tamaño,
course, by
pues
being such a
producimos
major
más residuos,
company, we produce a lot
utilizamos más
more
agua,
waste, we use a lot
generamos
more
más
water,
emisiones y
we
eso lleva la responsabilidad del
produce a
tratamiento
lot
correcto
more
de ellos, ¿verdad?
emissions, and of course, that
Tenemos
carries responsibility
operaciones
of their
en
correct treatment.
distintas partes de
We
la
have
República.
operations around the country
Tenemos
in
4
different
plantas
locations
donde hacemos
with four
distintos
main
vehículos, pero no solo
manufacturing
vehículos,
plants where
también
we
generamos motores,
produce
transmisiones
vehicles, but not
y
just full
diferentes
vehicles. We have
pues,
gearboxes
partes
and
automotrices para
motors and different
exportación
auto
y
parts
también
for
internos, ¿no?
export as well as
Y pues bueno,
for internal
dentro de todo
internal
esto
use,
tenemos una
domestic
visión
use.
muy simple
As part of this,
y la
we have a
visión le llamamos
very
la visión
simple
triple cero.
vision, and we call
Esta
this the
visión
triple
triple
zero
cero
vision.
trae la
This
que es
triple
cero
zero
colisiones, cero emisiones
considers
y cero
zero collisions,
congestionamientos.
zero emissions,
Cero colisiones,
zero
muy enfocado a
traffic.
la seguridad,
So,
cero
in terms of
congestionamientos,
collisions, we
enfocado a
focus on
autonomía y
safety and
a
emissions. We focus on
tener un
um,
viaje confortable, ¿verdad?
self-driving and having a
Pero
very
obviamente nos
comfortable
vamos a
drive.
especificar hoy en la
But
parte de cero
today, we
emisiones,
are
¿no?
going
Que
to
cero emisiones no
focus
solo
on
quiere decir a
this
la atmósfera, sino cero emisiones de cualquier
zero
tipo
emissions or zero
de
releases, which is not
contaminante.
only
Y es
into
una
the
visión
atmosphere, but
bajo la cual
considering
nos
all sorts
guiamos.
of
Y
pollutants, and this
pues
is the vision that guides us.
realmente esto empezó en 2018 por ahí
This started
y para el
around
2020 ya en punto de vista
2018,
de
and
gobernanza
by
ya
2020,
teníamos
in
ahora
terms of
sí
governance,
desde los más altos niveles de la
we,
compañía un Chief Sustainability Officer
from
para
the
que
top
esté
levels of the company,
dando y
we had to
aportando
respond to a chief
las
sustainability officer
opiniones
who
y
would
las necesidades
provide
que tenemos
opinions that met and
como empresa, como
suggestions and
mundo
to work
también,
towards
para
meeting the
exigirnos como
needs
empresa
that we have as a
a
company and as a
estar
part of the
sobre ellas,
world,
¿no?
so that we would
Y
demand
entonces
ourselves as well to
hemos
cover.
logrado ahorita tener un panorama pues
Now we
bastante claro,
have
diría yo,
reached this very clear outlook on our circular economy, which is internally divided into two sections. The circular economy in terms of our infrastructure and operations, and our manufacturing, and then a second part regarding our product. In manufacturing, we have to look at resource management, considering energy and water, minimize, reuse, and recycle our waste, and also to preserve the biodiversity in our facilities and in the communities where we live and work. And then when it comes to our product, we have to look at our design and engineering. Our product is certainly a product that you use for a long period of time, 5, 10, even 15 years. And the technology that we include today in our product for that long life cycle will be impacting our environment. So this is why, as part of this analysis, we include the circularity that goes into the use of our product and even the remanufacturing, recycling of our product as well.
De nuestros, lo que son nuestros objetivos, ¿no? Ya tomando en cuenta nuestra
move on to our
circularidad, nuestro
objectives
enfoque,
now, looking at
nuestros
our
objetivos, tenemos que
circularity,
establecer
which is our
muchos objetivos
focus. We
distintos,
need
no hay
to
un solo
set
objetivo
very
que cubra
different
todo. En
goals.
general,
There's
si
not
tomamos pues, el tener una
one
neutralidad de
size
carbono
fits
para
all.
el año
We need to
2040,
be carbon neutral by
pero
2040.
necesitamos muchos pasos y
But
atacarlo
for
de
this, we need to take a lot of steps and we need to tackle this from different fronts.
ponemos muchos objetivos en
So we have
energía,
many
en
different
agua,
goals in
en
terms of
residuos,
water,
en lo que es
energy,
los materiales de nuestros
waste,
vehículos.
the
Pero
materials we
hoy
use
quisiera
in our
enfocarnos
product and our
en lo
vehicles.
que son
Today, I
nuestros
would like to
residuos.
focus on
¿Qué
our
hacemos con
waste
nuestros residuos?
and what we do
¿Cuáles
with
son
our
nuestros
waste.
objetivos?
What are our
Y
goals
como objetivo
regarding our
primordial para
waste
residuos
management?
tenemos
And
el
primarily,
desviar el
in this topic,
90%
we
de
are
los
looking
residuos
at a
operativos
deviation of 90% of our
de
operational
confinamiento, de
waste
incineración y de recuperación energética. ¿A qué nos
from
referimos con eso?
confinement,
No queremos
incineration,
la
and
recuperación
energy
energética
recovery.
tampoco.
By this, I
¿Por
mean
qué?
that
Porque queremos
we do
mantener
not want
dándole
energy
el ciclo
recovery
al mismo
because we
material, a
want
la
to
vida
give the material
continuamente.
its full
No
life
es no
cycle and to
destruirlo y
work on
aprovecharlo
this
energéticamente,
continuously. We do
¿verdad?
not
No que
want
sea
to
malo,
destroy
hay
it to use
opciones
the
donde
energy
sí
that
es viable,
produces. It's not a
pero
bad
de
thing.
primera instancia
For
y
some
darle su prioridad a
situations, it
aprovechar
is
el material.
viable, but initially we want to make the
Y
best
le llamamos,
use of
como
every
muchas
piece of
otras empresas
material.
también, a
And as
esto
many
la
other
estrategia de cero
companies, we
residuos.
call this our zero
No se
waste
confunda con
strategy.
cero residuos a
Let's not
confinamiento,
get mixed
porque
up
también incluimos
with
esta
zero
parte
waste
energética,
for
¿verdad?
confinement,
Y
because
lo
of
dejamos
course that
así, mantener
includes the
la
factor of energy.
conservación de los
So with
recursos,
this, we're
¿verdad?
looking at
Sin
the
quemas
conservation or
ni
preservation of
confinamiento
our
ni vertidos, ¿no?
resources without
Y entonces, de esta
burning
manera,
our waste or
tenemos,
putting it in landfill.
plasmamos una
In
jerarquía
this way,
donde al
we
mero
have
tope
created
tenemos
this
la parte de
hierarchy where at
rediseño.
the very top we're
Tenemos que
looking at
buscar cómo ni
redesign.
siquiera
We
generar
have
el
to
residuo.
think about
Ahí
how to
nuestra
not
parte de nuestro
even
equipo de
create
sostenibilidad
waste. Our
está muy
sustainability
enfocado
team in
y
this
ya está
part is
integrado
strongly
de
focused and it
manera
has been
orgánica
put
al
together
equipo de
quite
ingeniería,
organically
¿sí?
as a
Para
part
poder
of our
obtener
engineering team.
un mejor diseño de baterías, un
So
mejor
we get
diseño
a better
de
design of our
plásticos, un
batteries,
mejor
of our
diseño
plastic
y
parts,
aleaciones de
of
metales para
our
nuestros
metal
productos,
alloys
¿no?
as well that we
Para que
use in
al
our
momento de
products,
yo en la
so that
manufactura también
when
hacer,
I,
por
in
ejemplo, mis actividades de
manufacturing,
estampado,
have
tener
to
menos desecho.
work on a
Después de esto, pues
specific
bueno, ya
part,
conocemos un
I
poquito más,
have
no me voy a ir de uno por uno, pero tenemos
a
el
lot
reducir,
less
reusar
waste. I will not
y
look at each
reciclar,
of
¿no?
these, but we also
Donde
have the
claramente, pues
reduce,
bajo esa
reuse,
jerarquía
recycle,
siempre vamos a tratar de
which in this
reutilizar.
hierarchy, we
Hemos
will
tenido varios
first
proyectos
always
donde
try to reuse.
algo tan
We've
sencillo
had a
como
lot of
taponcitos
projects where something as
que vienen
simple
en nuestras
as the
partes,
small
se los regresamos al
caps
proveedor para que los reutilice y
that
nos
are
vuelva a
in our
traer
parts, we
el
send them
mismo
back
material
to the
con los mismos
vendor for
taponcitos.
them to
¿Para
reuse
qué
and
generar
resend us
nuevos?
a material with
Cosas
that
de
same
esas,
cap.
crean
Why make new
que
ones?
no solo
It's
son
small
un bien
things
para el
like
medio
that
ambiente,
that are not only
generan
good for the
ahorros,
environment,
es lo que yo me he
but they
dado cuenta.
actually create
Y esos ahorros
savings.
son importantes.
I've
Ya
noticed,
que
and
los vas
those are
sumando cada uno de
significant
estos
savings
proyectos,
once you start to add them
llega
up on
a
each of
tener
our
una
projects.
significancia muy
They
importante.
become quite
Y
important.
obviamente abajo tenemos pues la parte de la jerarquía que no es buena, ¿no? Donde ya tenemos
Below, you can see the hierarchy that
cuestiones,
is not
quemas
good, where
y
we
también
have
hasta
burn
lo inaceptable que
or
consideramos que son, pues bueno, el
unacceptable, for
confinamiento,
instance,
obviamente, y también
confinement,
estas
for
quemas, ¿no?
example, and also burning.
Nosotros en particular
We
tenemos dentro de nuestro sistema a lo que le
in our
llamamos
system
desviado y no desviado. Por eso decimos
have something that
90% mínimo de
has this
desviación.
being
donde queremos que la
deviated or
parte
not.
desviada es todo lo que
So that's
sacamos o
why
quitamos
we want 90%
de
of deviation. The
confinamiento,
deviation
de
should be
quema,
everything that
y
we
ya
remove from
lo vamos pasando
burning
hacia
or
etapas más
uh,
cercanas a la base de esta pirámide,
disposal,
a la
and
parte
we
alta
get
de esta pirámide,
to the
diríamos.
highest part of this
Y
pyramid.
entonces sí pusimos un umbral del
So we
90% como
have a
límite
90%
para tener
threshold as a
más bien como
limit
meta mínima
or as a minimum
para llegar a
goal
esto.
to get
Y
here.
por medio de fórmulas y tomando en
And
cuenta
through
años base,
formulas
es
and
como
taking into
calculamos
consideration base years,
cómo
this
va
is how we
esa
calculate
tendencia
the
a lo largo
trend
del tiempo, ¿no?
over
Pero no
time.
solamente es calcular, no
But this is
solamente es
not
tener el numerito, también
only
hay que hacer cosas
calculating or
distintas donde
estimating or
pues
having a
tenemos que tener
certain
esas métricas
figure.
detalladas de esos
We have
números,
to
pero
have detailed
asignarle
metrics
cierto
for those
presupuesto al
numbers and
proyectos de mejora. No
allocate
saben la cantidad
certain
de proyectos que hemos
budget
tenido, muy
for
sencillos,
improvement projects. We have
y
had a
solamente por
huge amount
asignar
of
un
projects
pequeño
that just
presupuesto y
uh,
darle esa
when
opción
we
a los
allocate
empleados a que
a
ellos mismos
budget
sugieran
and
estos
giving the
proyectos de mejora,
employees and
llegan proyectos
workers
que ni siquiera requieren
the option
inversión.
to
Proyectos de
improve
mejora
projects
donde
that do not
ya
require
utilizamos, por
investment.
ejemplo, mucho de
Improvement
nuestro material que
projects
llega de
where we use
proveedores de
most of the
empaque
materials from
para
our
empacar nosotros
suppliers
mismos cosas de nuestros
uh,
residuos
to
y se puedan
pack
ir a disposición sin
our
tener que
waste
poner
and can be
empaques nuevos o
disposed of
comprar o
without
tener
having
otro tipo
to
de empaques. Y ese
buy
tipo de
new
proyectos no requieren nada de inversión. Pero también
new
tenemos un sistema completo
packing
por el
material.
cual si alguien requiere de
And if
inversión,
someone
no les
requires
pedimos un
investment, we do
retorno
not
de esa
ask
inversión.
a return
No
on
les pedimos
investment
que
for that
tenga
project.
una
We do not
factibilidad financiera.
request a
Les
financial
pedimos
feasibility. We
cuánto
just ask
dinero, o sea, cuánto dinero necesitas por
how
tonelada
much
de
money
residuo
you need
desviado.
per ton
Y bajo ese
of
indicador
diverted
es como definimos quién se
waste.
lleva
And that's how
el
we
presupuesto
define
que
who's going
tenemos.
to take
Le damos
the
la
budget
prioridad
that was
a cuánto
allocated. So we
residuo estamos desviando
prioritize
y de esa forma
the
asignamos el
diverted
presupuesto.
waste, and based
No
on that,
buscamos el
we
retorno de
allocate the
inversión.
budget.
Ya
We are
tenemos el
not
presupuesto
looking
asignado
at
anualmente
a
para eso,
return on
¿verdad?
investment. We
Y
already have
finalmente
a
tenemos
budget for
viajes de
that
prácticas
purpose. And then we
donde
have
compartimos las mejoras.
practices
Aquí
where we
existen
share
muchas,
the
muchas
improvements.
mejoras
Here
que
you
salen
can
de
see
piso,
many
salen de
improvements that
nuestros
come from
empleados.
the
Ellos
floor,
son los
from
que
our
viven día a día
employees,
las
because they are the
actividades
ones
y
that
tienen las ocurrencias
experience
más
those
frescas.
activities on
El
daily
escucharlos es
basis,
muy
and
importante
they have
y que no, de una vez
fresh
que hagan
ideas.
algún plan
Listening to
piloto
them
en su
is
área,
extremely
el
important. When
exportarlo a
once
todas
they
las
have
plantas a nivel Norteamérica
implemented
es
a
muy
pilot
importante
plan,
para que se pueda aprovechar.
and if it is successful, we scale
Me
it up
enorgullece
to
decirles que
all
hemos
North
superado nuestra
American
meta
facilities. We have
del todo lo que, y
exceeded
ya por el
our
segundo año
goal
consecutivo,
for the second
logramos
year
una
in a row.
desviación
We have
a nivel
already
global
we
de
have
todo
been
General
able to
Motors de un
divert
94.6%, ya casi 95% de
94.6%,
nuestros
almost
residuos.
95% of our
Esto no
waste.
ha sido fácil,
This hasn't
ha
been an
llevado
easy
pues trabajo,
journey. It has
pero
taken a lot of
estoy
work,
feliz de decir que
hard work, but
ahorita
I'm
ya
happy to
superamos
say that we have
nuestra meta y estamos en
exceeded
búsqueda de
our
metas
goal,
nuevas.
and
Estamos
we
ahora
are
sí,
looking for
tenemos que
new goals, new
rediseñar el
targets.
sistema
We need to
completamente. Este año
redesign the
planeamos salir
system
con un sistema
completely.
nuevo
This
que
year,
espero
we're
después
going to
volverles a
launch a new
compartir,
system, and I hope
donde tal vez ya no
you
solo
invite me
veamos
to share
el
it
residuo y el tonelaje,
soon,
sino su
where we're not
afectación
going
en
to see
emisiones de
the
carbono
waste and the tonnage, but
y su
the
emisión en
impact
cuestiones de
on
transporte
carbon and transport
agregados al residuo mismo,
added
¿no?
to the
Entonces,
waste.
estamos en investigación justamente de cuál debería de
So
ser nuestro residuo,
we are
nuestro
looking at
objetivo nuevo.
the
Y
new
con ello, pues
objective
bueno,
or target now. And
regreso
with that, I would
a
like
mi
to
inicial,
go back to
donde
the
pues les
initial
platico toda esta experiencia
slide.
es solamente en residuos,
This
lo que les
experience
platico.
is only in
Tenemos
waste.
programa
We
similar en agua.
have
Estamos
similar
reciclando
programs for
aproximadamente el
water. We
90%
are
de nuestra agua dentro de
recycling
nuestras instalaciones.
90% of the water
Tenemos programas
used
de
in our
biodiversidad
facilities.
certificados
We
por el
have
Wildlife Habitat Council.
bio
Tenemos obviamente planes de
certification by
utilizar
the
Wildlife
Wildlife
energías
Council.
renovables
We want to use
en todas nuestras
90%
operaciones en los próximos
renewable
10
energy
años.
in the next
Y
10
eso
years.
en la manufactura,
And
la parte de la
that
manufactura
is in the
la controlamos
manufacturing
y la
side.
vivimos más
We
fácil.
control
El
it
reto
and we
ahora
can live
está en
it
la parte
more
del
easily.
producto,
Now the
donde estamos
challenge
buscando
is
claramente tener
focused on the
metales
product
con menos,
where we can
menos
where we want to
huella de
use
carbono,
metals
tener
with a
también
lower carbon
lo que es la parte de
footprint,
reutilización.
and we want
Estamos
to
invirtiendo como General
reuse.
Motors en compañías
We are
de esas
investing
que
in
puedes
General
reutilizar
Motors
el
with
auto,
companies
de
where the
revenderlo,
vehicle can
compartirlo,
be
¿verdad? Para
shared,
tener no
reused,
solamente mercado ahí,
etc.
sino
So
también pues
we can
opinión
have
y de cierta forma
a market space,
incentivarlo,
but
¿no?
also
Y
a
no
way
solo nos vamos a quedar ahí en productos, sino
to
también tenemos
trigger this commerce.
una gran
So
afectación en nuestra cadena de
we
suministro.
have
Estamos
a great
pidiéndole a nuestra cadena
impact
de
on
suministro
the
metas
supply
y
chain.
reportes
We
para
are
que ellos
asking the supply
también
chain
aporten
to
a esa llegada a
have
esa neutralidad de
targets
carbono.
so they
Así como
can reach the carbon
en años
and
anteriores, que ya
neutrality
parecen
we
muy
are
lejanos,
looking for.
nadie conocía del ISO 14
Nobody knew
y
about
hoy en día
ISO
nosotros
14,
como
but
OEMs
nowadays,
les
as
forzamos
OEMs, we
a la
have
cadena de suministro a tener estos
forced
estándares de
the
calidad.
supply
De igual
chain to
manera es
have
nuestra
these quality
responsabilidad
standards. So it is
forzarlos
also
ahora
our
a que
responsibility
participen
to force the supply chain
en
to
estos
engage
esfuerzos
in
para la
these
circularidad,
efforts
para
for
minimizar los residuos y los
circularity,
contaminantes.
reduce
Muchas
waste
gracias.
and contaminant pollutants. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Pablo. Y
Thank you
bueno,
very much,
vamos a abrir
Pablo. And now
a
we're going
preguntas.
to open the
Tenemos
session
dos
for
aquí en sala,
questions.
tenemos una en
We
línea.
have two questions here
Vamos a empezar.
on the floor and two online.
La
So
primera
we're going
aquí,
to start
una en línea,
with
y
the
vamos.
first question here and then one online
Gracias.
and
Buenas tardes,
so
Blanca
forth.
Gutiérrez del Instituto
Good
Politécnico
afternoon, Blanca
Nacional.
Gutierrez from the
Si pudieran
National
compartirnos
Polytechnic
cuáles son las
Institute. Can you
características que
share
ustedes toman en
what
cuenta
are the
para
characteristics that you take into
reconocer
consideration
cuero
to
sostenible?
acknowledge sustainable leather?
Sí. Me regreso
Let me go back to
a mi hoja de datos.
my data sheet.
Vemos muchos materiales sostenibles. El
There are
cuero sí
many
es uno de ellos, el que estamos
sustainable,
trabajando. De hecho,
sustainable
pues
materials.
muchos
Actually,
dirán,
we're working
ah,
on leather.
ya es falso.
Many would
Pues es
say
falso
that
adrede.
it's
Justamente por eso.
fake, and it's
Ya
fake on purpose
la cuestión de
because
lo de los materiales nuevos
the new
son materiales que
materials
duren más.
are materials that
Y para
last
que tengan más
longer,
durabilidad, lo
and
que
for
buscamos es
them to have
justamente,
more
son materiales
durability,
que asimilan al
we
cuero, son de
need to
vinilo,
have
y ya
vinyl
digo, los he visto,
materials that
no en
that
plantas de
are
nosotros, porque son
long
plantas que nos
lasting.
preparan los asientos y
And
ya nosotros
this is
los ponemos,
not in our
pero son
facility
rollos.
because
Y el rollo
there
está
are
completo, ¿no?
other
Te das cuenta, lo ves y dices tú, esto
facilities that
parece cuero, pero
create
realmente es un rollo ya
the
hecho,
the
¿no?
the
Y
the
son pues
fake
materiales
leather. Actually,
realmente,
they
como lo digo, de cuero
provide
falso. Ya el cuero real
fake
en muy
leather
pocos carros se utiliza
rolls.
y de esa forma,
Actual leather is
pues
not
también
used
cada vez
in many
ya podemos entrar en
vehicles
un ciclo de
anymore.
mejora
Now
continua
we can go
hacia el mismo
into
cuero,
an
en el sentido de, o bueno, hacia el cuero
improvement,
falso, en el sentido de cómo
ongoing
lo puedo hacer
improvement
más durable,
with
que tenga más
fake
durabilidad, que no se deshaga
leather.
para no tener que
So it's
reemplazarlo tan seguido, ¿no?
it
¿Cómo lo
has
puedo
more
hacer más,
durability and it
pues,
doesn't have to be
vistoso, que se vea
replaced.
bonito, etcétera,
How
para
can
que
we look
el
it,
cliente
make it
le
look
guste más
better
también, ¿no?
so that the
Ese tipo de cosas
customer
son lo que ahora ya se ve,
prefers
pero
the fake
realmente
leather? The
en los autos
actually
que utilizamos
in
ya
the
muy
vehicles that
poco
we
cuero real, ¿no?
manufacture, we don't use
Yo,
much
yo rápidamente,
real
querida
leather.
Blanquita,
Blanquita, dear
comentarles
Blanquita, I
en
would
la
like to
sesión pasada que
show,
tuvimos
to tell you
de
that in
membresía,
the previous
Lear Corporation
uh,
anunció
Real
que como parte de los
Corporation for the
materiales para la
memberships mentioned that
manufactura de
for as
vestiduras
part
ya
of
están
the
utilizando PET, lo cual los
materials
hace
they're
también
using PET.
reciclables.
So
Entonces, bueno,
this
son avances
makes
que se
it
van teniendo en diferentes
a
rubros.
recycling
Sé que no
material.
es
This
cuero,
is a progress. I
pero
know that is not
también estamos
leather,
trabajando en eso.
but we're also
Y si me
working on
permite,
that, and is
perdón, una
currently
segunda
being used
pregunta.
for the seats.
General Motors ha
General
considerado, está
Motors has
considerando
General Motors
responsabilidad extendida.
considered
Yo
extended
si ya no quiero mi asiento porque
liability.
se rompió,
For
lo puedo llevar a
instance,
General Motors, ¿me lo recibe?
if I don't want my
Es
seat
muy
because
difícil el control
the
tan detallado,
the fake
¿verdad?
leather is
Pero
not
en lugar de
working
trabajar
anymore,
directamente con el
well,
consumidor,
it
lo que
is
sí hacemos es
difficult to
trabajar
have
con los centros de
such a
acopio,
detailed
las
control,
personas que
but
manejen la recepción de
uh,
esos materiales
we
para
can have
asegurarnos que ellos
people
le den un
to
reciclaje
have
apropiado,
to
¿verdad?
collect
Muchas veces
to have collection centers.
quisieras meterte a abarcar
Sometimes
mucho,
you would like
pero el que
to
mucho abarca,
be
poco aprieta, ¿no?
be
Entonces, lo que
everywhere,
hacemos en lugar
but
de irnos directamente a
instead
lo
of
que es el
going
consumidor, es justamente buscar la
directly
manera
to
de
the
que, uno,
consumer,
existan las opciones,
we
todas
want
esas
want
opciones que
to have
sí
the
tengan
options,
los
and those
procedimientos
options
adecuados para que
should
el reciclaje
have
se dé
the
de manera correcta.
processes, the correct processes in place
Una pregunta
so
en
this can be
línea
done
de
correctly.
Marta
We
Reyes,
have an
específicamente
online
para
question
General
from Marta
Motors.
Reyes
Su
for
sistema de
General
gestión
Motors.
ambiental,
Your
al
environmental
tenerla
management system,
insertada la economía circular,
since it
¿qué
is part of the
certificaciones
circular
internacionales estandarizadas
system,
cuenta
what are
para
the
que su producto pueda ser
standardized
aceptado en su
standard international
importación
certifications
a Canadá y Estados
so
Unidos?
that the product can be
Pero
accepted
las certificaciones
in
varían
Canada and
también
the
en
States, but
Europa,
also
Asia, Países
certifications
Bajos,
vary
con
in Europe, Asia,
con
and
altos estándares de sistemas de gestión
and
ambiental que se
with
obliga
a
a tener
high
las consideraciones
standards for
sociales y
environmental
económicas.
management that forces you to have social
Ahí lo
and
que
economic
pudiera comentar
considerations
es
as well.
que
What
sí,
I would
o
like
sea, el
to
grupo de
say is
ingeniería
that the
es el que lleva
engineering
más esta
group is
parte
the one
donde
that
el auto
is
debe de
responsible for
cumplir
this part.
con
The
tanto la
vehicle
normatividad
should
mexicana
meet the
como la
Mexican
normatividad
standards and
estadounidense
regulations
en
as
cuestión
well
de
as the
emisiones en particular y también
USA
en cuestiones
standards and regulations in
de
terms of
materiales
emissions, but also in
y todo
terms
lo
of
que conlleva.
materials and
Entonces,
everything
es el equipo
involved.
de ingeniería y por eso
The
la reestructura
engineering
reciente
team,
que
and that's
tuvimos,
why
donde el
we are
grupo de
going through
sostenibilidad,
a
ahora en lugar de estar en la
restructuring
parte de manufactura,
sustainability instead of
reporta y
being in
está en el
manufacturing,
grupo de
is
ingeniería
currently
para
reporting to
justamente ir
engineering.
empleando más
So we can
estas
use
prácticas y enfoque
these
hacia
practices more
lo que son
often
emisiones
and
alcance
focus
3,
on
tanto de
reach
nuestro producto como
three
de nuestra cadena de
emissions or
suministro.
releases
Entonces,
of our
sí,
product
sí
and
lo están
our
considerado todas
supply
esas
chain.
certificaciones, no me las sé de
So
memoria,
all these
pero
certifications have been
las lleva más
considered.
el grupo de
I
ingeniería
do
para
not
poder
know them by
atacarlo.
heart, but
Tenemos un
yes, we
programa
have
que
a
lo que estamos tratando de hacer
department
es
devoted to that. We
agarrar
have a
simplicidades
program
de donde podamos.
that
Todo lo
involves
que hacemos
simplicity.
era muy complejo.
If
Había líneas de
we did
producción para una
many
región y luego
things that
para
were
otra,
complex, there were
y eso genera un
production lines
costo
for one
administrativo
region
adicional.
and then
Entonces,
another
por
one
medio
for
de
another
ingeniería, por
region.
medio
So through
de innovación,
engineering, through
buscamos generar
innovation,
esa
we
simplicidad
want
para
to
poder
generate that
acotar
simplicity so we
las
can
diferencias y poder
reduce
tener un
the
producto que cumpla con
differences
muchas
and have
distintas
a product
certificaciones.
that can meet all
Gracias.
these
Dos preguntas
international
más.
certifications.
No, tenemos-
And do you have any other
Sí,
questions?
muchas gracias.
Yes, thank you so much.
De entrada, un
First
reconocimiento
of all,
tanto
I
a
would
Pablo
like to
como a Alejandro por
acknowledge
su
Pablo
exposición
and
allí.
Alejandro
Me
for your
satisfizo mucho y me
presentations.
dio
I
bastante
feel
información para
very happy and
mis
satisfied,
investigaciones.
and I
Pero
got
también
a
tengo
lot of
algunas dudas y
information
algunas
for my
preguntas.
research, but I also
Tengo
have
dos al
some
menos.
questions.
Una de
I
ellas
have
muy
two
puntual y
questions.
quizá muy
One is
directa para
very
Pablo
specific and
Fernández.
maybe very direct for
La otra, relacionada con la
Pablo Fernandez.
inteligencia
And the
artificial,
other one
nos
is
llega a
related
todos,
to
incluso
AI. AI
personalmente.
is
Abrimos
affecting all of us,
la
including
computadora
myself.
para ver el correo todos
We
los días y
open
tenemos de 10
the
correos, 8
laptop,
que tienen
we
que ver
have
con la IA.
uh,
Entonces,
10
ya iré para allá,
mails
pero
and
voy a
8
tratar de
are
concretarlo
related to
para
AI.
ustedes dos,
Well,
Alejandro
I would
y
like
Pablo.
to
La primera,
pose two very
relacionado con esto que
specific questions.
decías,
Well, in relation
Pablo,
to what you
de
mentioned, Pablo,
que
in
están
terms
pensando, y obviamente que
of
debe ser así,
the new
la incorporación de
targets,
tecnologías nuevas, de
including new
innovaciones.
technologies
Esto
and innovations.
necesariamente conlleva consumo de energía.
This
Energía que, al menos en
involves
México, la
using
matriz
energy.
energética nos dice,
The
bueno, tres
energy
años atrás, la
matrix
CENER nos dijo que
3 years
ese
ago,
mix
the Senate told
energético
us
o
that
matriz energética está compuesto por
energy mix
un poco
is
más de
made up of more than
75.6%
75.6%
de
of
fósiles. El resto le llaman
fossil
limpias,
fuel,
pero de
and
ese
the
más o
rest
menos
of the
15,
energies are called
25%, no todas son renovables, aunque les llaman
clean
limpias. Pero en fin,
clean
el asunto
energy.
está que
Not all
tres
of them
cuartas
are renewable,
partes
but they are
de la
called
energía que se
clean
utiliza
energy. So three
para
parts of the
producir electricidad
energy
proviene de
that
los
is
combustibles
used
fósiles.
comes from fossil fuels.
Y por supuesto,
And
las
of
nuevas
course,
tecnologías
the new
necesariamente, en
technologies
caso de la inteligencia
in
artificial
case of
o los centros
AI,
de datos que se masifican por
with
todo
the
el mundo,
data centers
incrementa
massified
también
all
el
over
consumo de
the
esa
world,
energía en base
increase
fósil, como debo decir,
the use of that energy
y por
based on
consiguiente las
fossil
emisiones de
fuel.
gases de efecto
And
invernadero,
therefore,
que incrementan el
there is an
sobrecalentamiento,
increase
el
on
calentamiento
the
global
greenhouse
desencadena
gas.
después en
And
cambio de
then it
patrones
leads
climáticos, lo que
to
se llama comúnmente
global
como
warming
cambio
and
climático. Entonces,
then
ahí hay una
uh,
responsabilidad fuerte, seguramente,
climate change.
por el
Well,
área que tú tienes a tu cargo, Pablo, pues
based on
es muy
the area
importante
you are
y claro,
working,
eso se
Pablo,
viene a
I
venir,
think all these
se ve venir que
considerations
va a
are
incrementarse
important.
las
So we know
emisiones
that
de
the
gases de efecto
emissions of
invernadero
greenhouse
necesariamente por el
gases
mayor consumo de
will
energía. Entonces, ¿qué
increase
previsiones
because of the use of
se
energy.
toman?
So
Pues
what are the
concretamente con relación a
what are
emisiones, que es el
you
caso de esta reunión.
envisioning for the future?
Viéndolo del punto de vista de manufactura. Vamos a
Well,
tomarlo
from
desde
the
el punto de vista de
manufacturing point of
manufactura.
view, so
Y
we're going
pues,
to divide this
pues
from
desde
the
el punto de vista de
manufacturing and
manufactura,
product
la
points of view.
inteligencia
From
artificial
the
nos sirve
manufacturing
como una herramienta, porque esa herramienta nos
side,
va a ayudar
the
a producir un
AI is
vehículo
a
más
tool
rápido, más,
that
de
will allow
forma
us to
más eficiente,
produce a
de
vehicle
forma
more
mucho más
rapidly in a more efficient
fácil.
manner
Pero también en la
and
parte de la
more
ingeniería, o sea,
easily.
esta
But
cuestión
also
de
engineering,
AI, ¿no? Nos ayuda
engineering
pues
will
en
be
a facilitar la
benefited
ingeniería detrás del
by
vehículo
AI
y todo esto, ¿no?
for the
Sí se va a usar
vehicle.
más,
We will be
pero
using
realmente
AI
no
much
creo
more,
que al nivel
but I
que
don't
realmente
think
demuestre una
that we
diferencia
will use it
particular
at the level
a nuestro
where
sector
it will
en lo que son ya
make a difference in
los
our
centros de
sector
datos o algo así. Ya
and
si
data
hablamos
centers.
en las empresas de
But if we
tecnología y
talk
todo esto,
about
pues ellos sí
uh,
van a utilizar
technology,
mucho más
technological
energía.
companies or
¿Qué me
IT
gusta de la
companies,
parte
they will be
justamente
using
de la
more energy. What do
electromovilidad?
I
La
like
parte de la
about
electromovilidad y el hecho de que sean autos
electromobility?
eléctricos,
The fact
y
that we
ahorita hago
have
la analogía justo
electromobility and we
con esto
have
de de
EV
energía, es que hoy
EVs
por hoy si vas en un
is
auto va a
that
seguir quemando combustible a lo largo de su vida
if
si
you
lo
are
mantienes.
driving a car, it
Pero
will
si hoy tienes un
continue
auto
burning
eléctrico,
energy. But if
tal vez
you
hoy
have
contamina
an EV,
ese 70%,
maybe
pero
it's polluting that
dentro de unos
70%.
5 años,
But in five
conforme va
years,
avanzando
as the technology
lo que es la red,
advances, as
sí,
the
obviamente
network
tenemos que invertir,
advances,
tenemos que intervenir
obviously
para
we need to
aprovechar que se
invest and
mejore
we
esa red,
have to
pero conforme va avanzando, la misma
promote
eficiencia del
encouraging that
vehículo
network.
va
Eh,
mejorando en
the
cuanto
efficiency
a
of the
su emisión
vehicle
de carbono en su vida.
evolves
Lo
and
mismo veo
improves
para la energía
in
necesaria
terms
para
of
lo que
carbon
son
emissions, but
los
also
datos, donde si hoy por hoy tal
I
vez se
see the
genera
same
mucha energía
thing
y esa
for
energía,
that
más bien, se necesita mucha energía
we
y
need a
esa
lot of
energía
energy
pues
to
es
manage data,
proveniente mucha
and that
de
energy
energía fósil.
comes from
A lo
fossil
largo del
fuels.
tiempo vamos a ir
But
viendo,
over time,
tenemos que,
we
como
will see,
país, como
and we
comunidad,
as a
ir
country, as a
cambiando a
community, we need
energías
to
más
start
limpias y se va a
switching
ir
to
reduciendo la afectación,
cleaner
¿no?
energies,
Sí
and
lo veo
that
más
impact will
no
be
dentro de la industria
reduced. I
automotriz,
see this not
esa
on
parte, pero
that
sí
impact in the
ya algo más
automotive industry,
como
but
pueblo de exigir que
as
nuestras
a
energías sean más limpias.
community,
Sí,
we need
pero
to
a mí
demand
me
that
viene
energies have to be
algo con lo que
cleaner.
no estoy muy de acuerdo, porque tú
There's
hablas
something
de
there
la
that I don't fully
electromovilidad
agree with. You are talking
basada
about
en el tipo de
electric
electricidad que se
vehicles
genera
based on the
actualmente.
type of
Y
electricity
entonces,
generated today.
cuando cargamos una
So
batería
when
de
we
cualquiera
charge
de
a
los
battery
trolebuses o
for
metrobuses
any
que andan
sort of
circulando con
vehicle, even
electricidad,
the metro buses
la
that
energía que
you see
tiene
that cover
esa
public
batería,
transport routes,
como dije hace un
the
momento,
energy from
redondeando,
that
el
battery, as you mentioned, to sum
75%
up,
es en
75% of
base
that
a
is
combustibles fósiles.
En
still
lugar del
Y,
100.
fossil fuel
y
based.
entonces lo que
Yeah,
sucede
as
ahí
opposed to
es algo que ya
100%.
está
Right.
generando
But
un
what
frente
is happening there
de discusión al menos
is
entre el
a
sector de
point of debate
transporte y el
between the
sector
sector,
energético que genera la energía.
the two
Porque lo
sectors,
único que está
transport
pasando
and
con esos
energy.
vehículos eléctricos que
So,
circulan
what is
hoy
happening
día
with
en
those
este
electric
país, en esta ciudad
vehicles
sobre
that are
todo, o allá
circulating
en Mérida, donde está ese
nowadays in
programa
anywhere
muy
in the country,
interesante que
Mexico
dio,
City,
estuvo
or
unas
even in
discusiones interesantes,
Merida, where
es que
there's a
se
very
traslada la
important, interesting
contaminación de
program,
los
and that
escapes
is
de los
that
carros
the
que los
pollution
vehículos
from
eléctricos
the
no tienen
exhaust
a
pipes
la planta
that doesn't
termoeléctrica que está
exist
generando
in
electricidad
EV
para
vehicles to the
recargar las
thermoelectric
baterías.
plant that
Es decir, el
generates that
sector
power, that
transporte,
energy
que
to
es
charge our
magnífico,
batteries.
obviamente, y qué
So,
bueno,
of
en las
course, the
ciudades no hay tanta
transport
contaminación.
industry
La
says, well, it's
contaminación está
cleaner,
sucediendo
reduces
en
urban pollution.
las plantas termoeléctricas. Y si
However,
viene el
the
aire para
pollution
acá,
is coming
hacia el
from the
sentido de esta ciudad,
thermoelectric plants.
nos
And if the
tragamos el
wind
mismo,
blows
bueno, se
towards the city, we're
contamina
still
el aire que
swallowing up or
respiramos,
breathing
para
up
decirlo en otras
the
palabras,
same
en la
amount
misma forma que si
of
salieron
pollution.
del
And it's
charcuaco, como decimos en México,
just
o
as
sea,
if it
del
had been,
escape del
as we
autobús,
said,
pero
as we
salió
say in
de la gran
Mexico, smoke
chimenea
right
que
out
tiene
of the exhaust
la
pipe.
planta.
Hay nada más un comentario y luego también
We have a
Alejandra quiere
comment, and
opinar
then
sobre
Alejandro
esto.
wants
Mi comentario sería, sí, estoy de acuerdo,
comment. So yes, I agree. It's true for today, but that technology in the thermoelectric plant, since it's concentrated there and it's not in every engine in every vehicle, is still more efficient as it is today. And as you said, 70% rather than 100. That's a big deal. We cannot change it overnight. We need to continue working, and we will continue to do so. Well, renewables are the solution, but we're not there yet. It's quite simple to me, and it has to do with our individual scopes. Now, in the automotive industry particularly, they do not decide what type of energy they can use. There is a portfolio available to us. We would absolutely love to have a fully renewable grid and to purchase our power from there. As you know, we have secondary laws that are being discussed that restrict the quantities that someone like the automotive industry could have access to. Mexico is extremely rich in terms of energy sources. We have fossil, wind, solar, geothermal. We are actually fourth in the world in terms of geothermal potential. We have shale gas, even if we don't agree with fracking, it's there. And other countries like the US or Argentina are also using it quite successfully. We have, again, wind, we have power from the waves. And again, we would all love to use nothing but renewables. But I think that we'll have to leave this discussion to another time because Orlando's looking at the watch. Apologies, we need the microphone.
Sí, quería
Thank you.
saber si la jerarquía de residuos que
I wanted
acaban
to know if that
que
hierarchy of
realmente es muy buena
waste
porque
that you've
en Fronteras
shown, which
Comunes
is
y en la
really
colectiva
good,
estamos
in
desde
Fronteras
hace
Comunes and
20
our
años contra la
collective group,
incineración y el
we've been
coprocesamiento,
fighting against
que no
incineration and
es un
co-processing for
reciclaje,
20
sino
years,
una
which is not
disposición
recycling.
final, ¿verdad?
It's
Pero bueno,
just
la pregunta
final
es,
disposal. Anyway,
General
the
Motors
question
trae
is
esta
if
estructura, esta
General
jerarquía
Motors
de
is
residuos a
following this
nivel
hierarchy
internacional. Y ya la última
internationally.
política era
And
curiosidad si se va a llevar Trump a
finally, it was a
General
political
Motors.
question out of curiosity if Trump is taking General Motors out of Mexico. To answer your first question,
los datos que le estoy presentando aquí
when it
hoy en
comes
día
to the
son
data that
globales.
we presented
En
today,
todo
these are
General Motors,
global
la
for
jerarquía se
all General
aplica
Motors.
a
The
nivel global
hierarchy is
y lo que
applied
es también el
worldwide,
95% que
and
tenemos es a nivel
it's
global.
that
Realmente dentro de ese
95% is also
95% de
global.
desvío va
Within that
incluido más
95%,
residuo
we're
de lo que
including
generan
a lot
muchos
more
estados de Estados
waste
Unidos
than what many of the
por el
states in the
nivel que
US
abarcamos
generate because
globalmente
of
como empresa. Entonces
what we
sí,
cover
es algo
globally as a
que
company.
globalmente
So
estamos
yes,
manejando.
we are
Y
working with
pues bueno,
those
con mucho gusto puedo decir la
globally.
respuesta a la
And
segunda
I am very
pregunta
happy
es no
to
comentar.
answer your second question with a no comment.
No soy el área indicada para opinar
I
al
mean, I'm not in
respecto,
the right area
singularmente.
to
Ya
give you
quisiera
my
participar en
opinion.
esas
I
reuniones
would
también
love
muy
to
estratégicas, pero
have a seat at the
no
table
estoy
in
expuesto a
those
esas
discussions, but I'm not.
charlas.
It's above my pay grade.
Al final de la sesión de hoy,
So, at the
un
end of
foro
today's
abierto, quizás
session, we
podemos
have an open forum,
continuar las
and maybe
preguntas,
we can
pero queremos
continue
pasar
this
para que pasemos
discussion.
tiempo.
But we want to move forward for the benefit of time.
Aquí hay una.
Acá también.
Over here.
Gracias. Soy Pedro Gutiérrez.
Thank you,
También
Pedro
del Instituto
Gutiérrez,
Politécnico
also from
Nacional.
the IPN.
Hablaste en un par de ocasiones sobre llevar las
You
emisiones a nivel 3.
mentioned a couple of times that you would take
Eso
these
correspondería
emissions
a
or
también
releases
hacer que
to
tu
a
cadena
level
de valor
3.
estuviera reduciendo sus emisiones.
So this would mean that your
Básicamente
value
CO2
chain would also
equivalente.
reduce its
¿Estarían ahí
releases.
ustedes
It
siguiendo
would
alguna
be
metodología en especial?
CO2
¿Están
equivalent.
con la
Are you
metodología de
following a
instalaciones
specific
basadas en
methodology
referencia
for
o de
that, or
LTFAS?
are you using the
¿O cómo
science-based
van ustedes
level
a
3
controlar
solution?
que las empresas de la cadena
Or
de
how are
valor
you
al
going to
menos
make sure that the companies along your value chain are also reducing their emissions or releases, not only by using those materials from recycling and so forth, but that there is actually a transition into that CO2 reduction throughout the value chain for you to reach the goal that you mentioned by 2040, because otherwise it's
Sí,
impossible.
concretamente, como lo dije, nuestra parte de alcance uno ya está muy dominado.
Right. In
Nos tenemos que
our
enfocar en
first
alcance
level,
3,
we've covered that. We need to
y
focus on
eso
our level
incluye
3.
justamente nuestras cadenas de suministro,
And that
tanto
actually
previo a
covers
la
our value
manufactura como
chain
después de la manufactura
before,
y
pre and
tanto el
post
producto, ¿no?
manufacturing
Entonces,
and towards the
la respuesta es
product.
sí, sí tenemos
So
que
the answer
incluir
is
todos
yes.
estos
We
temas,
do need to
no
include all these
solamente
topics in
decirles que
our
reciclen más.
discussion and not just tell them to
Ahorita lo
recycle
que es
more.
la forma en la que lo estamos manejando
The way we're
es
handling
le estamos pidiendo
this
a
now
nuestros
is we're
proveedores
requesting
directos
our vendors, our
que ellos
direct
contesten
vendors,
cuestionarios donde les
to fill
preguntemos
in
justamente sus
a few
metodologías, sus
surveys
formas, sus
where
esfuerzos,
we
y
ask
también los
about their
estamos invitando a que
methodologies and
participen
their
en la parte del
efforts, and we
QB3
ask
en el
them to
guía que existe
participate
para así evaluar
in
bien
the
cómo está
existing
su estatus actual en
questionnaires
sostenibilidad.
to assess
Y
their
poco a
current
poco, pues como en
status.
todo, le iremos apretando la tuerca un
And of
poquito
course,
más
we will be pushing
para ir guiando a que
a
ellos
little bit
también
more
estén
gradually
reduciendo sus emisiones
and guide them
equivalentes.
towards reducing their
Gracias. Y la
emissions.
segunda parte de la
Thank you.
pregunta.
And the second part
Para
of my
poder
question,
tener en realidad esa
to
reducción considerable de emisiones,
really to
también están
actually have these
pensando
considerable
en
reductions,
las empresas
are you thinking about
estén cerca de cada una de las
any
plantas
companies
de
close to
ensamble
the
de trabajo de
manufacturing
ustedes,
plants, to the
ahí
assembly
puedan tener su
plants that you
cadena de
work
valor?
with, that their
Porque en
value
la mayoría
chain
de las
could be
ocasiones se está trabajando
closer
mucho.
to them? Because
Sí,
let's
reducimos
say
esto como
sometimes you're
empresa, sí,
working a
pero se
lot
le
on
están
your
cayendo
reductions, like you
defensas,
have
se le
a
está yendo,
company, yeah, but you're
y el
importing from
gasto ya
China.
energético y
And
las
there's a
emisiones
huge
que
energy
conlleva
expenditure
el
and
traslado en
emissions
barco o el
that
traslado
implies, even just a
de un lugar
transfer
a
by
otro. Por
a
ejemplo,
container
hace
vessel,
poco había que
or
llevar unos
like a
materiales
while ago,
prácticamente de San Luis Potosí
you needed
a
to move
Yucatán,
material from the
y eso
state
es
of San Luis
totalmente
Potosí in the
insostenible.
central region of
No,
Mexico to the
completamente de
Yucatan.
acuerdo. La preferencia siempre
Right,
existe
no, I agree. There's always
para
a
tener
preference,
a
though,
nuestros colaboradores
um,
y nuestros proveedores cerca de nuestras
to keep
propias
our
plantas.
collaborators and our
Eso siempre ha
vendors
existido,
closer to our
y no solo por
manufacturing
cuestión de
plants or
sostenibilidad,
assembly
sino hasta por
plants.
cuestión
That's
económica.
always existed, not
Pero
only
también
due to
le
sustainability,
agregamos a
but pure
que
economics.
cuando, por ejemplo, están cerca
To
de
that, we've
nosotros,
added that if
ahora
they're closer to
utilizamos empaques
us,
retornables
we are now
y ya no es
using returnable
necesario
packaging.
tener disposición de residuos
So
adicionales.
we do not
Entonces,
have that
tiene demasiadas
additional
ventajas
waste
estos
disposal. So
fomentos
it
y
has
sí, es algo que
too
tomamos en
many
consideración
advantages
porque utilizando empaques
to
retornables,
overlook, and we are
teniendo al
considering
proveedor
it. We're
cerca, la
using those
calidad
returnable
mejora, teniendo,
packages. By having our
es un
vendor
sinnúmero
close by, the quality
de
improves.
beneficios, ¿verdad?
So we have
No
endless
siempre se puede,
benefits.
es la realidad.
However, it
Lo
is not
intentamos
always
siempre
possible.
dentro de lo
That's a
posible.
reality. We do try to do as best as we can.
Perdón, son dos preguntas. Una era para la presentación
Again,
anterior con Elizabeth Campos.
we have
No
two
sé si
questions,
se
one
pueda
for
responder también.
Elizabeth's presentation. Maybe you
Con
can
el
answer
tema
that here.
del plan para la prevención de la
When it
contaminación,
comes to the
evidentemente está
pollution
enfocado a las
prevention
empresas que ya están
plan,
en
that's
operación,
focused on
pero si este
companies
tipo
that
de
are now
sistemas están
operating, that are already
también
operating.
pensados
But
para
are
empresas que
these
todavía no
systems
están
also
operando.
being
Es que
thought
dice
out
como una
for
parte de una
companies that
manifestación de
haven't
impacto
started
ambiental, si existe un
operations?
plan
Like as a
maestro
part of an
de
environmental
desempeño
impact
ambiental que se
statement, is
tenga
there
que
a
ir
master
respetando y que
plan
se
for
tenga que ir acoplando a
environmental
los mecanismos
performance that needs
existentes.
to be respected and adapted to existing
Y
mechanisms?
si aprovecho en lo que a lo mejor se traduce y manda la otra pregunta, nada más lo del General
And
Motors,
the second
¿cuál es el
question,
certificado o tipo
for General
de
Motors,
compromiso que
what
tienen
kind
con
of
sus proveedores
certificate or
para
commitment do you have with your
incentivarlos a que
vendors
sean parte de
as an
una cadena de suministro
incentive,
verde?
let's say, to motivate them to be part of a greener supply chain?
Vamos a ver si Elizabeth.
Hola, gracias, Eric, ¿verdad?
Elizabeth,
Sí,
hi, Eric, right?
sí.
Bueno, en este momento los tres programas REDSE
Right
en
at this
sus
point, the three
requisitos de
PRTR
reporte
programs, as
tienen
part of
un
their
requerimiento, algunas veces obligatorio, algunas veces
requirements, there
voluntario,
is one that
que
can be
cada
either voluntary or
planta que
mandatory,
reporta dé
that each
información
reporting plan
sobre el
should
plan
provide
que hizo sobre
information
sus
about their
acciones
own
de reducción de
plans
la
or their
contaminación.
actions
En
to
este
reduce
momento,
pollution.
y el trabajo que estamos haciendo, solo estamos hablando de la
Right now,
comparabilidad de esos
we are
reportes
only
y de cuál puede
working
ser el
and
uso
talking
más
about the
allá
comparability of those
de que se
cuts
queden en
and
las bases de
what
datos, sino de
can
que se
they
pueda
be
usar
used for
para
beyond the
cumplir el
database, but actually
impacto
have them become useful in sharing experiences and creating new spaces for innovation, as well as promoting the implementation of these practices.
Gracias.
Y en respuesta acá
Thank you.
hacia la parte de la cadena de suministro, actualmente vamos
And when it
iniciando
comes
con
to
el
the
programa.
supply chain, we
Estamos en
are
la parte de
just now
recopilación de
starting with the
datos, de iniciar
program.
con toda la parte de estos cuestionarios de sostenibilidad
We
que
are
que
working, as
estamos
I mentioned, the
exigiendo a los que presentan,
sustainability
¿verdad?
surveys and
Y
questionnaires
todavía
that we
no
are
tenemos
asking our vendors
un
to
certificado
respond.
detrás
And
que
we
lo
don't
avale,
really
pero
have any sort of
claramente conforme va
certification to
avanzando y se
validate
va
that.
mejorando, pues
But as we
tenemos la
move
validación de
forward
los datos.
and as we improve, we
Entonces
want to
llegaremos a eso.
validate that
Hoy en
information.
día
So
vamos apenas
we
iniciando.
will get to it, but
Y
we're
en
just
ese
starting
sentido,
out.
General Motors ya tiene,
And in that
es
sense,
parte de alguna plataforma o un
is General
certificado
Motors now
propia
part of
que
a
vaya a
platform
ser extendida hacia sus
or
proveedores?
a certification program that will be
No sé si entendí bien la
extended to
pregunta,
their
pero
vendors? I'm not sure I
vamos a
understood
utilizar
your
una
question
plataforma
fully,
así
but
para la
we
parte
will
del
be using a
cuestionario
platform,
y
yes,
que se
for our
vaya
surveys.
ahí generando datos
And
y que
that
los
will
datos sean pues ya más
produce
confiables con
data
su
that is a lot
password
more
y todo para
reliable with
poder
passwords and so
tomar
forth,
acción más fácil.
so that we can take action.
Okay. Muchas gracias, Pablo.
Thank
Ahora
you very
vamos a
much,
pasar a la
Pablo.
próxima
Let's
intervención.
move on
Mejores
to our
prácticas para la
next
minimización
presentation,
y la
better
gestión de
practices
residuos
for the
industriales
minimization and
con
management
el
of
modelo
industrial
flujo de
waste
trabajo de toma de
with a
decisiones
workflow model
para
for decision making.
las para los ODS.
SDGs.
Sí.
Here we go.
Vale, los ODS. Sara Sayeri y Gary Beck de
We have
ERA
Sarah.
Environmental. Y bueno, quisiera solamente añadir que cuando hablamos anterior a
Sajedi
esta
and
reunión,
Gary Vay
nos
from
pareció
ERA Environmental.
el tema de qué es lo que conlleva
Workflow model for SDGs.
la toma de decisiones
When we were
para la prevención de
discussing
la
this meeting
contaminación.
and planning, we were thinking
Una información
about
muy importante para
the
que vean el
information
contexto
that
de toda
impacts
esta discusión.
decision making. And this
Estamos
is very
hablando de
important
actividades
information
de
that gives context to
prevención
our
de la
discussion. So
contaminación.
we're
¿Qué
talking
conllevan
about
esto?
pollution prevention activities,
¿Por qué camino nos vamos?
but
Y
what
esto es lo que
leads to
vamos
that?
a
And
tratar.
what does that
Muchas
lead
gracias.
to? What road are
Thank
we
you,
taking?
Rolando. Does everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you for having us participate in this very, I'd say, informative and very important meeting here in the beautiful country of Mexico. So on the team of our previous presenters, Sarah and I are going to co-present about waste minimization. This is the agenda that we're going to follow here. So we have a kind of order of what we're going to do. So this project, and Sarah's going to actually dive into a little deeper than myself here, has been going on for well over 5 years. This is the team members that are participating in the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years. So the waste minimization initiative, we were trying to figure out how can we pass on knowledge gained over all these years of working in industry, environment, government, academia to others. And I think really the whole idea of this type of meeting here in Mexico City is about collaboration, right? How can we share ideas? And so we came up with an idea, actually with Sarah's idea, to look at a way of taking a lot of the work that's been done in the past, successful work, and create a model. So the model basically is looking at developing a platform that we did. Sarah's going to explain it in more detail, and guidance documents of how to actually conduct the work to achieve waste minimization. Next slide, please. So one of the parts of the work that we conducted was initially when we started looking into the work that was done in the past and trying to organize it and put it into a model, we also realized that we should also go back and, as you do in academia, do a literature search, right? To find out what's been done in the past. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So here's some of the different materials that you can say we looked at. Of course, corrugated cardboard. We looked at the wood industry, plastics, even medical waste, sustainable waste management. On the waste side, municipal solid waste, construction industry, and metal industry. So these are areas that we went further into the literature, sort of like as an academia kind of point of view, to find out what else has been done, not just 5 years in the past, but maybe going back 10, 15 years ago. So what we found when we did do this literature review, we found that there were some gaps. And as Sarah's going to explain in a little bit more detail, our focus, although it was into the auto sector, we actually ended up looking into other sectors too by looking at this research. And the idea here was to actually develop a model that we could find ways of not disposing, as others have mentioned, waste as, say, waste to energy, right, or going to landfill. And as GM talked about, one of their goals is zero waste, and a lot of the OEMs are trying to achieve this, is to have steps in the model that we can actually look at different practices, right? And what type of innovative solutions we could actually look at to promote critical thinking, right? And we wanted to actually encourage, by providing some kind of guidance, we have guidance documents in this work, to actually show how to actually achieve those goals. So here's the model design. Of course, the first step was preliminary research phase, looking at different types of materials, right? So categorizing the materials, looking at contaminants, looking at waste management best practices, relevant processes that are already out there existing, right, in industry or in the literature. The next step of developing a model was to develop a list of questions by material type, so organizing the materials, right? And basically create questions. We looked at physical chemical properties unique to the materials that we're looking at, right? And if there was a contamination on those materials that we tried to address, and identify opportunities and limitations. The next step was grouping of questions into meaningful categories. So we wanted to kind of organize it so that it would be easier for the user to actually use the system to try to get answers to their questions, right? So we looked at manufacturing, design input, process, output, and category. And then what we did is we developed questions into a logical workflow model. Our company, as you probably know, is involved in environmental software for manufacturing. So we're taking that experience that we have for manufacturing and compliance and applied it to actually create a model. So we looked at offering different categories corresponding to questions. And then we basically gave routes of what you can do with the material. And we went from the most desirable to least desirable options and environmental impact. And we looked at the product chemical regulatory analysis. We looked at the different industry selection by NAAQS codes. We actually created a facility database. We actually used Orlando, and I say Danielle, so I know there's more, just the two of you, right? The taking stock as part of the work that we conducted. We also did a distance analysis looking at where the materials could end up for reuse, right? And after we had done all this work, we did what we call a comprehensive review, right, of the company's products that they were going to send to waste. And basically, the next step was to contact potential companies that could actually take this material. So this part here, I'm going to pass over to my colleague here, Sarah Sajay. She's going to actually explain a little bit more detail about the project.
Thank you, Gary. First, I want to thank CEC and beautiful Mexico having us here. Thank you for inviting us. We're honored. Also, I would like to give a tiny background on ERA. We're a private company, been doing environmental software for 30 years. Now, Ernesto said something, put a smile on my face, talked about taxes. And simply what ERA started and has done for the past 30 years is environmental accounting. Environmental accounting, like taxes, you have to report to the government what you're emitting. I'm a chemist, so is Gary. And we modeled every 30 different industries, including automotive, to be able to track and report their emissions to the government, TRI, NPRI, RETC, and also your emission inventory or COA and others. So we've been extremely successful. GM is our client, and about 85% of all the OEMs are. But meanwhile, Gary and I have been thinking about giving back. And this project is about giving back. There is no monetary involved in it. It is more academic than anything else, and helping industry and environmental. So we are not subject matter experts on waste minimization. So about 6 or 7 years ago, when John Bradburn, I don't know if Paulo knows John Bradburn, but he worked in GM for 40 years, and he helped GM save over $1 billion, and he received the award for environmental sustainability and helping community. And we met him through SP, and we also met the CEC through SP. So when he was retiring, I sent Gary specifically to Detroit to meet him and to ask him to join us as a consultant and be our subject matter expert. What we are in ERA, we're experts in modeling. What John knows is waste minimization, and he knows how to do it intuitively. So the first 2 to 3 years, we spent time interviewing him and getting him all his stories of how he did all that. But there was no pattern. And in order to program or to create a model, you need to identify patterns. And you need to be able to organize thought process. So we got him in a different path and started putting him through some of what now has transpired to be a model. I called it a virtual John. Imagine walking through a facility and having something, a software that asks you questions that provokes your thought process in minimizing the waste of what you're intending to minimize. If nobody asks questions, there is no answers, and the waste will become waste. So I'm going to read this part because I think it's very important. The world faces a growing crisis in sustainable solid waste management. Waste is traditionally defined as movable objects without direct use, often discarded permanently. However, as our Buckminster Fuller stated, waste is a resource out of place. Instead of disposal, waste should be viewed as a valuable commodity. This always moves me because if we do that, we can have a better future for our children and grandchildren. And actually, John and I and Gary, this is what we see, is we want to leave something better for the future. So we created the model looking at plastic and many other corrugate, wood, and about half a dozen different material. But a model without a case. So developing 30 years of software has taught us that you have to put a model into use in order for you to actually see if the model works. So UGN, through SP, quarter 2020, we presented the model, the first version of it, and we had a company called UGN, which is a tier 2 supplier to automotive, asked us to help them to analyze their waste stream and try to see if we can find a home for it. So how does this work? I'm going to explain the model to everybody a little bit. So we collect general information. general information about what is your material, how much volume, and depending on the volume, volume has a lot to do with it. If the amount of volume of waste is low, there's one thing to do with, and if it's high, is another. Physical properties. Is it flammable? Is it corrosive? Is it hazardous? Chemical properties. Is this going to be carcinogen? Is it going to cause harm? Is it supplier is responsible, or is it in-plant contamination if there is chemical hazards? What is the design and process options? What testing methods can be used to test and see what type of hazards we're dealing with? Because without knowing the hazards, you cannot, the knowledge of knowing what it is, it helps you to be able to place it. Then looking and recycling and composting options, and then the least desirable. Least desirable is when you burn it for energy or landfill it. Well, we managed to put hundreds of questions, and as well as something Gary referred to as recommendations. Because questions without giving solutions is useless. So John and our team has been very busy for the past 3 to 4 years, building over 148 recommendations, and we will go through that as well. So the general information we talked about, so the question categories are mentioned and color-coded, and as well as we have manufacturing input and design. Somebody here said something which was very valid. It was, I think, Eric in the end, or one of the questions that came in was, should we prevent before a material is built? It would be amazing if the government put something in place that before a product came on to become a product, look at the full life cycle of it, see if it's going to cause harm and or it's going to cost us a lot of money to dispose this 20 years down the road. So that is part of the design and input and process and output. So if you took a look and you see they're tiny, but by the way, these are all free and we're going to be giving you, it's all available and we have it online. So the processes are organized in a manner that the questions are asked and a question leads to another. So right now we have put it in a spreadsheet. Our intentions is to actually turn it into a software that you can walk around with it and implement to use it to walk you through the process rather than the questionnaire like Excel. But we now have partners like Eugene and a few other companies that we give the questionnaire to. They provide the answers, and then we analyze. So does this contain multiple material, for example? If it's a multi-material, then you're going to have issues because how do you separate them? If it is not, you take a different path. If it's yes, it's a different path. Size. How much material are you dealing with? If the volume is large, then you can find a commercial endpoint for it. But if the volume is small, maybe you should be looking at a community project that would use it. And we will talk about this because John is a big advocate of community use, and he has lots and lots of examples of it. The physical properties, such as type of material, size, shape, texture, all of that matters. If there's issues that it says it's no, then you have a different path that if it is yes, there's additional questions asked. Chemical properties are extremely important. Being a chemist, people have to pay attention to chemical composition. And how do you analyze that? It tells you where it can be used. If a material is highly flammable, it cannot be used as, for example, insulation material. But if it is not as flammable and it can be coated, maybe it can. So analysis of what type of chemical you're dealing with is very important. And that's where knowing, also examining the physical, seeing the material and being able to look at them and being able to analyze how easy and how cost effective is it to separate them. Because if it's too complex for a large company, it may not be it might be cost prohibitive to separate. So you have to provide solution that is cost effective, because waste minimization and reuse cannot bring more cost. It should actually save cost and bring revenue. And that's a way that it would be more successful. So the chemical properties of these materials were analyzed, and after analysis, we found out that no product component were deemed hazardous, and they would drastically limit it. So we used our software. The software has over 200,000 plus chemicals and regulations underneath. So, but we are actually putting a document together to teach people to do it without our software, because we don't want to be selling our software to people. We want to be teaching them how to do waste minimization. So after the initial questions, we go in contamination. If you think about bolts, the bolts, if they have oil on them and they come in a corrugate container, if they're not lined with the plastic, the oil goes to the corrugate cardboard and makes the corrugate cardboard not recyclable. So what's the solution there is, where did the contamination coming from and who should take care of it? So if it's coming from the shipping, then you have to ask the supplier to use the lining in order to not have the contamination move to the cardboard, so the cardboard can be recycled. Because a contaminated cardboard cannot be recycled and has to go to waste, and it would cost the company money. One other thing I wanted to mention, everywhere that you see the R's, R1 through R, those are recommendations. So every question, if an answer is yes, we have a recommendation, and sometimes a secondary question and a secondary recommendation. And those recommendations are the documents, 140 something documents that we're talking about. After the general information, depending on how they answer, you could be looking at an in-plant contamination or a supplier's contamination. And depending on that, both of them, you may have to do testing. Because in order to be sure that you're doing the right thing for the waste minimization, there should be some testing done so you are sure about your path. Finally, after the testing, if the method, the supplier cannot change or in-plant cannot change, the least desirable is to burn for energy and or go to the landfill, which we're trying to avoid. But the best one, and with good design and process options, could lead you to recycling and composting options. And again, all of these are step-through questions, and we guide the companies through it, especially the few first projects. We're doing it pro bono for no cost to the companies, and we invite them to do that. So Gary's going to talk about industry selection.
Thank you, Sarah. So we looked at various industries when we were looking at materials that were actual waste at the plant. We wanted to find out what would be the type of industries that could actually use that material in their process to create better products. So we looked at asphalt, the paving, block manufacturing, that's the next code there, excuse me, carpet and rug mills, adhesive manufacturing, veneer, plywood manufacturing, and alternative and energy. Excuse me, next slide. So glad to say that the work that we've done is actually, excuse me, losing my voice here. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so basically, the work that CEC is doing with taking stock, we actually, this to show you the idea of collaboration, we actually took that tool and we used it to do research on NACS codes to actually identify facilities, right, from the database. From that UGN case study in the United States, we actually were able to generate a list of potential industries within a certain radius, right? Next slide, please. So this is the distance. We understand that somebody else mentioned about shipping stuff from China and that logistics. So it's not only expensive, but there's a lot of emissions to that too. So, I mean, if you have to truck the material all the way across to the West Coast, that's not really good. So we, through the taking stock database, identifying potential companies that could actually receive the material, we created this kind of radius on the map from the facility. Excuse me. So product analysis recommendation report that was done, right? We basically, once we went through the whole process with UGN's material that Sarah had the photos up there, from actual automotive supply chain, they do sell to the OEMs, right? We gave proposal recommendations. We gave a list of potential facility partners. We also looked at potential industry applications and how to justify, because a big problem in the plants is that how do you go sell it to your boss, right? That, hey, this may be good, because a lot of times they're just looking at the cost, right? And they're kind of not bothering with the rest. So how do you sell it, right? So the importance of networks and partnership, and I think this meeting here today in Mexico City is a great example, right? When you involve different stakeholders, right? So as I talked about in the beginning of discussing this 5-year-old project, the knowledge sharing, right? How did we take all those things that were in John Bradburn's head from, 40 years of being in sustainability and actually put it into something that people could actually use, right? Enthusiasm for the subject matter. So how can you get excitement? I know that previous discussion was pretty exciting, so kind of the bar was very high for us to meet there. But it's very important because we look at, as Sarah mentioned, like if we can identify renaming a waste to be actual it's a material and getting away from that description, then we can actually maybe do great things with the material. So engaging the innovators. So final outcomes. Sorry, what? Formation of based on personal relationship, like we're doing here today, right? Meeting people in person. I know there's a lot of you online too, but so setting measuring goals geared toward multiple impacts. A recognition that a project can take time to succeed. It's not that easy, right? Look at this. It's taking us close to 5 years what we're working on. The recognition, the inclusion of diverse institutions, like from large companies to startups, right? Everybody has a place, should have a say in the process, right? So building also on successful reputation, I think that's key here too, because a lot of this knowledge that was created in the model that Sarah thought about developing with John Bradburn actually came out of work that he did when he was at GM. It's not just something that it may work, it's the kind of idea you're going to do it in your backyard or your shed or something. It's actually what he had done at the company. And frequent communication. So let me see, what's the next? I got to pass on to Sarah. Sorry, we're juggling back and forth here.
Thank you, Gary. So the final outcome, when initially we dealt with UGN, they had told us that they did not want to ship more than 150 kilometer radius from the manufacturing site because it would become cost prohibitive. But they actually, after we searched and we could not find within the restriction that they gave us, through networking, they did find building industry. Because of the recommendations we had made, they networked and found a building industry that was a little further than 150, so we didn't hit it. But they found a partner, and they have been shipping this waste to the building industry and as a part being used as a raw material for them to use for their insulation. So it was a successful, but initially when we started wasn't, because they were not able to find it within a given radius. We learned something from them, is that distance matters and the cost matters. And that is something that we are improving in ours. Now, moving on, we talked a lot about guidance documents. And in a guidance document, which is right now has 148, but we're building more. And by the way, it's in a public website that anybody can download. We provide a background context. We provide UN Sustainable Development Goals, because each one of these guidance documents hits one of the goals. And we talk about benefits, how do you save cost, and how do you generate the revenue. Guidance documents start with the name. For example, repurposing plastic packaging material for plant-based application. This is one of GM's projects. The tray bin for the bolt or volt. There wasn't as many, so John turned it into a community project because the numbers weren't as high. They actually use it for planters. It meets 3 of the UN sustainability goals, goal 9, 11, and 12. And there's background recommendation and there's benefits. And also, we are helping our community. So all those volt casings that was going to be disposed of somehow now is serving the community and creating goodwill between the community and GM. Cost saving, they didn't have to pay to dispose it. And maybe it wasn't revenue generating, but it is goodwill when somebody, I think goodwill is also revenue generating because people buy your products more. It's online. There's a link underneath it says access to database. So all of these can be reached, and we are willing to collaborate and write more of them. John is still working with us as a consultant, and we have staff members that are scientists. We're all looking to give back, not just sell something. And this is the list. All you have to do, fill in your name and email, and within 5 minutes, it will be emailed to you. Right now, we have for corrugate, 63 documents, plastic, 70 documents, wood, 54, metal, 21, textile, 6, and others, 7. And we're building more and looking for collaboration with others. So, as I said, John is big, and so are we in meeting sustainability and SDG. What do we want here? We're hoping to see if companies needing this type of waste minimization, they have hard waste that they don't know how to dispose of, knock at our door. There's no cost. There's nothing to worry about. You fill in a few pages and we see how we can help. If we can be of a help, the only thing that we get back is validation of the model. If the model gets mature within a few years, this could be helping many, many companies walk through without having our help to actually be able to achieve these goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Gary. Estamos retrasados.
We are now running quite late, so we'll just answer a couple of questions. We'll have a break and then we'll come back. I would just like to mention that this last part, the last part of this session, actually links to the next phase of our initiative, and it fits in really well. How can we exchange and facilitate the exchange of information between companies for their decision making? Any comments or questions? Luis?
Can I use this? Okay. Puede ser en inglés. Just
It
to
can be in English.
favor direct question. Very nice presentation, Gary and Sarah. And certainly we are looking forward for the initiative. One issue probably will be if are you foreseeing a way to certificate or homologate or achieving any way of proving that the facilities participating in waste minimization initiatives are going to receive any kind of incentives, and which will be the best way to convey this knowledge, for instance, companies like us that work as advisors for different industrial or services sectors.
Thank you for asking that question. I think maybe CEC might have something at their sleeve. Right now, we're just wanting to create something to help people think about waste minimization. Could it be certification? Sure. If we can have, because we're no authority. We are a software company, environmental software company, we're that. But our job is not to give certificates, but help people find a good solution. The best outcome for you is reduction of cost. Cost is very important. When you ship a material to waste, it costs money. It pollutes. And if you can find a reusable, so our purpose is to analyze your waste and see, can you find a better home for it than landfill or waste to energy? If we can find a better home for it, that on its own is cost saving because you don't pay for that. And that should be good enough incentive. At least we're hoping that's a good enough incentive right now. Can it become certification? That's something that I'm looking to authorities to say that would be a good idea if P2 programs, somebody steps in, because again, we don't have that type of authority at this moment.
Can I add something here? So as you guys know, these companies are publicly traded, and they do create sustainability annual reports that they have to show the shareholders. And what we're seeing, especially in automotive, trying to achieve those very high-level goals, zero waste, zero emissions, zero congestion, etc. They have a very high bar to reach. But the good news is that what we're seeing in our client base, that they are working very hard with their suppliers. And now that we're moving from ICE to EV critical minerals, they're directly working with the mines, which you didn't see that in the automotive sector, working with ferrous, non-ferrous metals, and when we were doing ICE vehicles. So I think we're heading in the right direction. Yeah, there's room for, like you say, certification to have incentives, but I think the OEMs are providing, and I'm not going to speak on Pablo's behalf, but I think they are providing some sort of incentives to their suppliers.
Thank you.
I'll just add to that, for example, we do have a sustainability report. Please go and download it. There's a lot more information than I just presented here. And just as an experience, I would tell you that to make that sustainability report, it's a tiresome process that it gets audited. And I need to go through audits that go manifest by manifest just to make sure that the data that we publish is correct. So, yeah, and it's audited not internally, it's by external auditors as well. So please go ahead, download it, and enjoy it. There's a lot of information there, and not only from us, from many other companies, and that should be a first step. If there is other certification programs, it also helps us get some kind of renowned to our brand. So your idea is good, but in the meantime, right now, there's this good option that Gary tells us.
Okay. Una pregunta más y vamos a un receso de 10 minutos.
One more question and then we'll have a 10-minute break. I think we have some people online who are in different time zones, so we need to move forward. Let's go to one more question. Right, thank you very much. It's a very interesting methodology. However, I think that it also relies heavily on the communication you have with companies and the different companies that you're working with. How can you set a stronger commitment with those companies to work together and provide information as well as novel information when many of these companies have patents or information that they do not want to share for competitiveness reasons? Mostly, there is a wood company that produces a lot of resin and oils to protect timber products. And it's already, because of the resins that they use, very difficult to figure out what kind of wood they're using. So there's a lot of industrial secrecy there. So how can you deal with that sort of commitment to provide information and a full disclosure of their products?
Thank you for that question. So first of all, we sign NDAs, our company. The second part is that after analysis is done, the information does not have to, so ERA, because of our environmental background, we have to report full disclosure, almost chemical, for environmental purposes to all the governments. So we have dealt with this for 30 years. We have a very blockchain type of design of our software where no data contamination happens. Your data is very silo, never touches anybody else. It's only for analysis. And if we transfer it from Excel to the software, which we will in the next stage of it, we don't even have to be involved. The software does the analysis. You as a user get the information, and it's only for your eyes. So, and the database is, I don't know if you know, blockchain is very siloed. Each company has their own database. There is no cross-contamination, and you're the owner of the database. So we deal with 30 different industries that many of them, especially chemical companies like Sherwin-Williams, PPG, AkzoNobel, Valspar, they're all Axalta, they all have very, very secretive formulas, and they do not, thank you. They don't want cross-contamination, and we have been able to prove to them that the software is very safe and the data does not have to go across. For waste minimization analysis, you need it, but for actually talking to finding a home for your waste, you can give them general information of overall, which does not give away your secret. So they can, you will not lose your material formulation. Go ahead, John.
As we've gone through our break, but I have one question in response to what you just said that really alarms me. I was with it, it was sounding great, but then I found out that the material is all secret. It's all private to the company. If they choose to release, they might release, but we don't get the ability to assess how good their analysis is, how good the assessment is, And, and it's been said during the call, they'll be using that as an opportunity for advertising or whatever. We all see those ads. And I don't mean the auto industry, I mean every industry. And so that alarmed me when I was with you till that last point when I got really alarmed about the secrecy.
One thing I have to tell you is that if the government wants to audit, whether it's government of US or Canada or Mexico, the information they have to provide, but it's not for public information, it's for auditing through governmental agencies.
And that
as far
doesn't,
as
yeah, okay, and that doesn't satisfy me. That does not satisfy me at all. Okay, not to condemn the governments, but
Can I add something here? So I'm going back to EV batteries. That's a real passion of mine. With critical minerals being defined by the US and Canadian governments as national security, also the recycling to retain these materials from all kinds of items, not just EV batteries. There's a push to have a system in place because the recyclers need to know the battery chemistries are changing so fast. They need to know the content, whatever is coming into their facilities and how they're going to process it. So I think that this change of technology, which I say is the largest change in the auto sector since Henry Ford introduced the mass production line in Detroit, Michigan, it's going to have to happen. If we're going to have a sustainable circular economy, and I think that's going to be a big driver for us there, John.
But we've seen all kinds of new technology systems brought in that had some fatal flaws in them. And it's really important that the people in the community, the people who are dealing with these things, have the opportunity to be making serious input into that assessment and to have access to the information for them to be able to make an assessment and say, wait, this isn't good enough. So I don't want to continue this forever. It's going into some other speakers' time, including my own.
Muchas gracias, Sarah y Gary, nuevamente.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Gary. It is now 4 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back for the final presentations. There's someone online, so we might have to change the order. Thank you.
Vamos a dar inicio a la
So we're
última.
going to continue with the last session. Can you please take your seats?
Vamos a continuar.
So
La
welcome
sesión
back.
4,
We're going to continue with session
con la
4,
prevención de la contaminación, aplicaciones de los datos y
pollution prevention
herramientas
and
gubernamentales. Vamos a tener un pequeño cambio en el
government
orden
tools. We're going
porque
to
estamos
change the order because
retrasados, así que vamos a
we are
comenzar
running a little bit behind. So
con
we're
el
going to
programa
start
de
with
Canadá, seguido por el programa de
Canada
Estados Unidos
and
y
then the
luego el
US.
programa
And at the end,
de
we're going to
México.
have
Así
Mexico's
que
presentation.
empezamos con el programa de
So let's start
MPRI
with
y la
the
prevención de la
MPR
contaminación.
and
Aquí está Andacom,
P2.
por favor.
Please.
Thank you, Orlando. I will be doing a presentation on pollution prevention as related to the MPRI mostly. So going over the data that we collect, the questions that we ask on the MPRI report, how you can find that data, some of the data highlights, and also how the government of Canada uses some of that data for some of their activities. So facilities must report the following information when reporting to the MPRI. So whether a pollution prevention plan has been prepared, if a plan is required under a governmental obligation, specify whether that jurisdiction or the applicable program or regulation. For example, they have reported under Environment Climate Change Canada's P2 planning notices. If pollution prevention activities were undertaken during the current reporting year, so not in previous years, but just the year of the report, and the substances targeted by these activities, and this has been in place since 2021, so fairly recently. And also, if they haven't done any pollution prevention activities, they must list the reasons why they haven't undertaken these in that current reporting year again. So in the system, facilities are able to select among 7 different pollution prevention activities, with each of them having subcategories. So these are material or feedstock substitutions, product design or reformulation, equipment or process modification, on-site recovery, reuse, or recycling, improved inventory management or purchasing techniques, spilling prevention, and good operating practice and training. And then again, these have subcategories, and I won't go through each and all of them. But in any case, for all the primary activities and the secondary activities, facilities are able to add in other information as well, to give additional contextual information on the pollution prevention activities that they've undertaken. And these are separate from pollution prevention plans. So a facility could not have any plan in place, but still have pollution prevention activities during that year to well prevent pollution. So facilities, once they if they do not have any pollution prevention activities, we ask them to explain we ask them to select factors that could explain the absence of pollution prevention activities. So these are substance or process or technology alternatives are unknown or unavailable. This is the most commonly picked item. So around 1,200 facilities last year reported this particular explanation in terms of absence of pollution prevention activities. But as mentioned earlier today, around 44% of facilities reported applying pollution prevention activities. So that means 50 or 56% do not have pollution prevention activities. So about 4,200 facilities around those numbers. The second most picked option is activities were implemented in the previous year, and additional activities are either unnecessary or infeasible at this time. Around 1,000 facilities as well picking those options. There's lack of sufficient capital to implement activities and insufficient understanding of how to implement pollution prevention activities. Both of those as well, around 400 each facilities chose those options to explain their lack of pollution prevention activities. There was also concerns that product quality may decrease as a result of the activities and limitations imposed by regulation or permit obligations. Around 100 facilities each for those explanations for the absence of pollution prevention activities. And then there are other factors as well that they can input in common fields. So 1,000 facilities about have also reported different factors as to why there's an absence of pollution prevention activities on site. So a little bit more highlights. So as mentioned, 2023, around 1,000 facilities reported having implemented pollution prevention plans. 600 of these carried out voluntarily, and around 400 of them were under a federal, provincial, or municipal jurisdiction. 3,500 facilities, so 44% reported facilities reported having carried out at least one pollution prevention activity. And in the map, you can see here, those are facilities that have reported a pollution prevention activity. So it spans the breadth of Canada and is quite varied in terms of the key industrial sectors that have applied these activities. And facilities reported having conducted pollution prevention activities on around 90 substances. Since 2021, we collect information on substance-specific pollution prevention activities. And the substances with the highest pollution prevention rates are volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, lead, ethylene glycol, and zinc. There's a few different ways to extract and access that data from our website, so canada.ca/NPRI. So the first I'll go over is the query site, which is our main page where you can look up either a specific facility, company, substance, or sector, and from there enter into a facility's particular report and look at that facility's either pollution prevention activities or an explanation as to why there's an absence of pollution prevention activities. The other source of information on pollution prevention activities is reported to the NPRI is through the MPRI database. So this is our relational diagram of database. So it's quite extensive. But this one has all the information available. But it is a little bit extra work to identify and extract that information. And then finally, we have the MPRI dashboard, which is a dashboard available directly on the MPRI website, which collects all the information on pollution prevention activities, in this case for the past 3 years, since that's the time when we started collecting on specific substances. And then from there, you can slice and dice the information as you're looking for. So depending on, say, in this circumstance, this is the substances that were affected by material or feedstock substitution activities. And you can see the different number of facilities that have performed that activity and then the substances that were targeted. And you can go look into each of the different 7 primary activities and then into the sub-activities as well. And then I believe you can also find the comments on there if there's additional information necessary. And we're looking to improve the dashboard as well in terms of P2 accessibility to data so that users can access it easier and be able to look at it in a wider format rather than either substance specific, facility specific, which is on the query site, or having to go into the database, which requires a fair amount of effort. So the information collected through the MPRI on pollution prevention activities primarily is used to is put online. Select activities are often placed online to advise businesses on ways to reduce pollution prevention. So different facilities can have access to this information in a more user-friendly way, and then perhaps be inspired to undertake these pollution prevention activities. And P2 notices, which is a separate program to the MPRI, also which collects additional information on P2 plans, P2 notice plans. Their reports are also available online on the Canadian Environment Canada website. And then previous notices are also available on the Open Government portal data. And then in addition to that, pollution prevention activities are also used by unit heads at Environment Climate Change Canada to be used as complementary information, generally when doing research on substance or facility risk management purposes. So it's a useful additional information when looking at risk management. So those are the highlights of pollution prevention across the MPRI, and I welcome any questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Any quick questions? Any online? In this one question online. Does the MPRI collect data on the effectiveness of a specific pollution prevention activities? I see data about which substances are most impacted by P2 activities, but not the percentage of reduction that can be attributed to a particular activity or type.
So I would say that information wouldn't be directly available. We don't collect percentages on particularly exactly how much substance was reduced by a particular activity. That information might be available in the comments that we require in terms of their effectiveness, or in the comments in terms of, say, when a substance is no longer used at a facility, we ask why, and then they might report that they've undertaken some kind of pollution prevention activity, and then they could get more information on that. But in terms of direct information on, say, percentages, we don't collect that information.
Thank you. I see, well, in looking at reports, sometimes you see you comparing 2 years of reporting and then the pollution prevention activity that happened. There you can infer how much, well, it could be other things. Yeah, you know exactly how much was because of pollution prevention. So it's a challenge, but I think this is a great question for I think, each one of the programs.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
You need to dig a little deep when you
Thank you.
know that information.
No other questions from the floor? Okay, let's move on then. We're going to go with Charlotte was.
Yeah.
Okay. Ya. Una demostración de la herramienta rastreador de sustancias tóxicas. Charlotte
The
Snyder,
toxics release inventory using TRI tools to find P2 data by Charlie Snyder from the TRI program of the US EPA.
Adelante, Charlie. Gracias.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm Charlie Snyder from the TRI program. And, okay, there we go. So first I'll just cover a quick introduction to the TRI and the P2 data that we collect from facilities, and then I'll give a quick live demo of a few of our tools, and then I'll hopefully have a little time for some questions. So much like NPRI, we collect information on our P2 activities, our barriers to P2 implementation, and free text comments associated with either of those. Our barrier reporting and our free text comments are optional, and they can also submit free text comments associated with other waste management practices as well. We have 24 codes that loosely describe P2 activities, and they're sorted into 5 different categories. So we have material substitutions and modifications, product modifications, process and equipment modifications, inventory and material management, and operating practices and training. And our barrier codes are very similar to those of NPRI, such as source reduction was unsuccessful, concern that product quality might decline, and also similarly, no known substitutes or alternatives is by far the most frequently reported barrier from any of our facilities. And as facilities add source reduction activities and barriers, they can enter that optional text. And so we really encourage facilities to include these comments. They're really helpful for doing things like providing technical assistance, learning about how facilities approach their barriers and challenges in P2 implementation. So for reporting year 2023, which was our most recent reporting year, we received more than 16,000 free text comments associated with source reduction, waste management, barriers, and other information. So now I'll move on to the very brief tool demo. The first tool I'll be demonstrating is TRI Toxics Tracker, and this is really our main tool for exploring TRI data. So I'll start from the TRI program home. This is epa.gov/TRI, and you can see our homepage here. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you get to kind of an abbreviated widget of the tool. And this is great for really quick inquiries, but I generally prefer to use the full version of the tool, which can be accessed by clicking this link here. And so this is our homepage. We have some key pieces of information at the top. And one thing to note is that it automatically loads with 3 years of data selected. There are the most recent 10 years of data loaded into the tool, and so you can edit this reporting year filter by just clicking or unselecting the years that you'd like to add. So I'll actually add 2 more years. So we're looking at 5 years of data. And this is a very powerful tool. There's a ton you can do with it. I will mostly focus on the releases tab, waste managed, and then pollution prevention to show you how to access that information. On this landing page, you can start a search by geography, sector, chemical, or look for a specific facility. And so I will click sector, and here we can use NAICS codes to look at a general industry sector, or if we want to look at specific subsectors, you can find the 6-digit codes here. We also have some preloaded profiles for these sectors, which align with our pollution prevention national emphasis areas. So we do have automotive manufacturing here, but for the purposes of this demo, I'll select chemical manufacturing. And so any filters you apply appear in this green bar, and you can edit them by clicking on them there. And so from here, I'll just go to the releases page. This is where you can find the releases information for the years you have selected. And I'll take a quick look at releases by chemical. So here we can find the top 10 chemicals by releases for these years. And we see that ammonia is released in the largest quantities by this sector. So we can select ammonia by clicking on it there. And if we're curious about P2 targeted at ammonia, we can go to the pollution prevention tab. And this is where you'll find all of the pollution prevention data reported by facilities for your filtered selection of data. So out of the 815 facilities that reported ammonia to TRI in the chemical manufacturing sector, we see that 76 of them implemented a source reduction activity, and they implemented 181 activities. We can see that operating practices and training has been the most popular source reduction strategy over the past 5 years, but actually for 2023, we see that process and equipment modifications kind of overtook it. So clicking on that wedge of the pie chart and applying that filter, now we can go to the activities and comments. And this is where you'd find that information about the specific source reduction activities that facilities implemented. So from left to right here, we can see the TRI facility and its TRIFID, which is its kind of unique identifier, and it's in our system. The chemical for which they implemented the source reduction activity. So it's obviously all going to be ammonia here because we have that filter applied, and the reporting year. And then we have classifications, and these are generally for classifying the comments that we'll receive. And then we have codes, and these will generally be the source reduction codes. So scrolling down, we can see these facilities didn't submit any comments for their source reduction activities, but we can see where facilities did write comments. So for instance, modified or updated equipment or layout, that's a process and equipment modification. And they got new ammonia compressors for 2 production facilities, for instance. Scrolling a bit further to the right, facilities can choose to report an estimated annual reduction from their source reduction activity. So that kind of gets at the efficacy of these source reduction activities. Facilities can estimate that and report it to us. But we actually have done some analysis in the past to see which category of source reduction activities are the most effective, and we've found that it's material substitutions and modifications. If we want to learn more about this specific facility and the P2 activities that it's implemented, there is a facility P2 report that'll bring you to more information on this specific facility and what P2 activities it's implemented for the full time that it's been reporting to TRI. So for some of these facilities, it'll go back to 1990 when the PPA mandated that facilities report their P2 to us. Apologies, the little screen sharing thing is getting in my way. But that is Toxics Tracker. And again, that's kind of our flagship tool. It's very powerful. And another great thing about it is with your filters applied, you can download any of the charts or tables, and they'll download as an Excel spreadsheet. So you can recreate charts or further explore these data. And so again, here's just a screenshot in case the demo wasn't working. But I'll also quickly explain how we've used some of the free text comments. Previously, these had been a little underutilized, so we're trying to figure out ways to effectively use the comments that we're getting from facilities. So we created a methodology to kind of automate this analysis, and we wanted to focus on finding solvent substitutions. And specifically, we wanted to find cases where we could figure out the specific substitution that occurred. So knowing the original chemical and then exactly what it was replaced with. And so to do this, we first narrowed our field by only looking at TRI listed solvents. So this is kind of a list of chemicals we have that are commonly used as solvents, and then compiled all the free text comments associated with these forms. From this larger pool, we narrowed our search by filtering for comments that use a few sets of keywords. So comment that uses any of the words in these lists will get pulled for further review. And so we had substitution phrases like changed, switched, or alternative. And then we had some process phases, and that's a list of keywords related to techniques that can obviate the need for a solvent. So things like powder coating or mechanical cleaning. And then we also have known alternatives that aren't TRI listed. So things like water-based aqueous solutions or other solvents like acetone that aren't included in the TRI inventory. And then from there, we go to a kind of tedious manual review process where we take that smallest pool of comments and flag the comments where we can figure out exactly what the alternative was. And from there, we create a database of specific solvent substitutions. So our initial analysis was from 2005 to 2020, and we found about 400 comments that described specific substitutions. The sectors that reported the most specific substitutions were chemicals, metal manufacturing, and transportation equipment manufacturing. There were 116 different combinations of original and replacement solvents or techniques. And these solvents most commonly replaced were xylene, toluene, and methanol. And the most common substitutes were aqueous products by quite a lot, and then switching from solvent-based coatings to things like powder coatings or high solids formulations. And so now I'll just very quickly take you into the database that we compiled. So this is kind of a purpose-built tool for looking for solvent substitutions. And this one can be a little finicky sometimes. It takes a little while to load, so fingers crossed. But if you're curious about that initial analysis we did, we also have a PDF here that you can open to learn more about that. In the interest of time, we'll not wait for this to load, and I'll just move on to a screenshot on the next slide. But here's what the table looks like. It's fully interactive, and it's kind of the same interface as the previous tool we looked at. So you can filter any of these comments, and starting from left to right, we have the TRI chemical ID, which is generally the CAS registry number with leading zeros and the dashes removed. And then we have the original chemical, the substitute, and if more than one chemical or a technique is named in the comment, then we'll list it in the substitute chemical 2 column. And then we have the actual text of the comment, which can be really helpful to find more information. You can find the year, the name of the facility, the sector, and subsector. So you can filter by any of these to, for instance, find all of the specific solvent substitutions that were implemented in the auto industry or the paints and coatings industry. If you're looking for an alternative to a specific solvent, you can filter the original chemical list, and you can also download all of the data that you're looking at as filtered to kind of preserve that table. And so that's all I have for now. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Comentario?
Are there any questions or comments?
Any comments online?
Hi, thank you very much. Charlie. Very interesting presentation. And I know from experience, I've been on the tools and there's so much information there. And I was wondering, you have information here that allows, I guess, industries to see what substitutes they can have, for instance, for solvents. And do you also, have sort of engagement activities or other activities that allow you to promote this kind of information in case, industries don't go online to find out themselves?
Yeah, so one of the main ways that we kind of get technical assistance out to industry is through our P2 grants program. So we will give grants to state and tribal organizations that are providing technical assistance. And then oftentimes we'll kind of help those technical assistance providers target facilities. So TRI can be a really useful tool for that. And we will also kind of show them our P2 information.
Charlotte, I have another question. In the list of substitutes, are those other TRI substances or substances that are not covered by the TRI? Or have you seen any substitutions of a pollutant that ends up being perhaps more hazardous or no information exists about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. We actually kind of see all of those cases. So a lot of the times they'll substitute for something like an aqueous product. And, that's the most information that we can get out of the question or out of the comment. So we don't always know what's in that formulation. And other times facilities will name a specific product, so we will include that as a substitute chemical. And sometimes we do see facilities switching from one TRI chemical to another. And it can be kind of difficult to discern whether that's just a straight up regrettable substitution or there are other reasons that kind of necessitate that change. So, for instance, one we see kind of frequently is facilities switching from mixed isomers of xylene to a single isomer like ortho or para-xylene because oftentimes there's up to 20% ethylbenzene in formulations of mixed xylenes. And so by switching to a single isomer, they can actually remove the ethylbenzene from their reporting. So sometimes there are efficiencies gained that we can't always get just from the comment.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, well, thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, then let's move on then with Semarnat, aplicaciones de los datos de REDSE en México, Zaira Mendoza, subdirectora de Información y Divulgación en la Semarnat.
Hola, ¿qué tal a todos? Buenas tardes, Zaira Mendoza. Bienvenidos a todos aquellos que hoy nos acompañan. Y bueno, yo
Welcome to
presentaré
everyone.
sobre la
I'm going to
aplicación de los
be
datos de
presenting
REDSE
on
México desde un enfoque
PRTR
cómo
data
cómo el sector
application
gobierno
and how
utiliza
the
la información
government
para
uses
fortalecer la
this
regulación
information to
y
strengthen
cómo ideas o
regulations
algunos
and
mecanismos sobre cómo
ideas and
también las empresas
mechanisms on
pueden
how
usar
the
los datos
companies can
para
use
mejorar
data
su desempeño
to
ambiental.
improve
No sé
their
si puedo pasar
environmental
ya, ¿verdad?
performance.
Bueno, comenzaré mostrando el
I'm going to
portal del
start by
reporte REDSE
showing
México, que en la
the
mañana también
website,
el
the
ingeniero Ernesto presentó.
PRTR
Este
website.
reporte
This was
anual, este
presented in the
reporte se
morning.
actualiza de
This
manera
annual
anual.
report
Este
is
portal,
updated
para quienes
annually.
nos están visualizando y
If
no lo
you
conocen, este
if
portal
you are not familiar with
se
this
actualiza cada
website,
año y lo
this
publica la Semarnat.
website is updated
En este
on
portal ustedes
yearly basis
podrán
and it's
ver
published
reportes
by
del año en curso
Semarnat.
e
You can
históricos.
see
Tenemos
the
registros desde el año
current
2004 al
report and
2013.
historical
Estos
record from
reportes están por
20,
empresa, sustancia y el
204,
tiempo, si es una
20,
emisión o
from
una transferencia.
2004 to
También se pueden hacer
2023.
consultas por
It can
estado,
be
sector y año
searched
y
by
un comparativo de
company,
emisiones y
substance,
transferencias entre
and
años.
type of
Aquí
transfer
sí me
and
gustaría activities. I would like to highlight based on some comments that have been given about the information of threats in Mexico. We are collecting information reported by the companies that based on the characteristics of the products that this information is reported. We are focused on the 11 sectors regulated by the federal government, but other sectors that are not included in this list, but because the water discharge and hazardous materials that are generated, they are also subject to REDS reporting. This doesn't mean that the rest of the sectors are not regulated. This will be a state competence. So some of the challenges that we have on the PRTR reports is the integration of the state RETs or PRTRs. Here we find challenges related to the state infrastructure, their specific regulations, and all these challenges have to be addressed with the states to be able to collect and include this data and have a more comprehensive analysis regarding the federal competence companies report. We have in 2023 over 2,295 companies that reported 75 substances. The use of REDS data has two main focuses. I'm going to start by the company, institutions, and bodies. With the REDS data, companies can take intervention actions in their companies and complete data analysis to reduce release and transfer of the substances. So I'm going to talk about reviewing trends and about their reports and increase or decrease of analysis. Also identify the substances with the highest release or transfer and analyze its source. I'm talking about the report format where companies report their input and processes, and maybe these companies can use all this information to identify where these releases or transfers are generated and if these releases can be reduced. These focal points may be from raw materials, transfers to land or water, and create assessments to reduce releases. This goes hand in hand with the following. The company may estimate operational costs and staffing and infrastructure to manage when managing the substances. Why? To take actions to reduce releases. In an analysis that I conducted in a general way, the nickel substances, I identified that even though there is a huge nickel management, 23% of this substance still has opportunity to be treated. Why? Because in the company's reports, this classification is not included. So this leads to, from a pollution prevention standpoint, in the COA in 5.4, item 5.4, we ask the companies to report pollution prevention activities. This is on voluntary basis. This is not mandatory, but it provides data from companies that are applying P2 planning. The companies reported that they implemented actions to treat waste, substituting input, changing fuels, or eliminating substances that could be eliminated and substituted by others. These data are not public in RedSep, and it is available for the population in case this information is requested specifically. Now let's talk about RedSep use in terms of the government. Well, in general, we have identified companies with the highest contribution or data inconsistency. We are working with inspection and surveillance so that inspections should include PRTR, identify those companies that include these major contributions. So we can work together to surveil and oversight these companies, not only for sanctioning purposes, but once these companies are identified, these companies would become a priority, and we will be able to identify where the release or transfer takes place, and we can strengthen the activities that they need to implement or measure or report to reduce these releases and transfers. Another point is the analysis of regions where red substances are released or transferred. All areas are relevant, but we can focus on areas where there is a highest industry contribution, and we can intervene. An example is the projects that at the beginning of this administration were focused in Hidalgo. So we are contributing with the reporting those companies in those regions. So specific plans can be implemented for those companies that are releasing or transferring these substances. We also have diagnosis per sector for the creation or update of standards and regulations. There are some standards that include red substances. The information provided from the companies provide valuable information to look at the sector on widely basis. This information is used to readjust the existing values to thresholds that reflect the sector behavior, and if technology allows releases to be reduced, well, we can have more restrictive thresholds. And regarding the use of red set data by the government is to track the substitution or elimination of substances incorporated in international agreements. There are other areas in Semarnat that use REDSE and the COA to see how the substances under international agreements are eliminated. These areas track the elimination and substitution of substances of interest with the companies. This is done specifically by other areas in Semarnat. And finally, we already have a tool, we have a legal framework, and we have infrastructure in terms of REDSE, we do consider that we need to make to advance in REDSE reporting. We need to publish more information related to REDSE in the website to make more information available, but we also have another starting point or intervention point, which is integrating the information derived from the reports, but also talking about the tools. We are going to have an improvement project. We're not going to change the COA. We are going to identify those areas in which the companies may be having some inconsistencies or may not be clear in some sections, and maybe there is an omission or a bad reporting. So this should guarantee the quality of data entered by the companies so we can have reliable data. We don't want to have data only. We want to have reliable and high quality data. So we're going to have a diagnosis or an assessment first. Based on that assessment, we're going to reconfigure the COA. The next project is an optimization project of the data revision process. How can we improve data and data analysis massively and individually? Well, by using IT to have the assessment on inconsistencies, out of range data, and then we can focus we can focus on those companies, and from that point on, we can prioritize data revision. Well, we have NOM 165 that is going to be updated. This was mentioned in the morning. This is an activity that takes longer because it has to do with legislation. We have to create assessments and other activities to be able to legislate. We're going to be working with the CEA because the CEA will be implementing the first standard, and then we will be updating our standard. And finally, we want to continue with the institutional coordination of regulating improvement. What do I mean? Well, COA collects data and analyzes it, but there are areas that also have a say in the data that we collect. We have ASEA, CONAGUA, risky activities. RENE is the registry of greenhouse gas releases, and these are areas that support the reviewing the COA and compliance. We need to continue working together with all these areas for compliance purposes.
This is not only about reviewing data, but also making sure they comply with the standard, that they have their permits, that they get all the updates, everything that is necessary. And it is a complex regulatory process of companies, and we need support from all the areas in charge of this regulation. That's it for me. In the next slide, on the next slide, you'll find our contact information for any questions or comments. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Zaira.
Thank you, Zaira.
Tenemos varias preguntas
We have quite a few questions now
en línea, pero
online.
Vamos a empezar con una en línea. ¿Cómo se vincula? Bueno, hay dos preguntas en línea. ¿Cómo se vincula el reporte de REDSE?
Let's start with our online questions. How do you link the REDSE report to the attributions of subnational governments? Right. Currently, the RETSE regulation is also applicable to subnational governments, like state governments, who in their environmental license or permit also include this section, because the law itself compels the states to enforce this regulation. Of course, they consider the lists in NOM 165 for their reporting, but it is important to point out that there are states that still need to move forward even more in terms of the regulation. We cannot say that they're all at the same baseline. But eventually, with the exercise we're about to undertake with them, we'll see those needs come up.
Sí, no, nada más como
A
comentario
question
ahí
here.
sobre eso. Me
Not a
parece
question,
excelente que
a
hagan esta
comment.
integración.
It's
Lo
fantastic
único
that you're
que notaría ahí
carrying
es que
on with
tengan cuidado
this
con la duplicidad
integration.
de
Just be
datos,
careful
ya que
with
muchas veces nos piden a nosotros como industria
replicating your
el
data.
tener
As
el
members of
reporte a
industry,
ambos
we are
jurisdicciones, ambas jurisdicciones.
required to submit that report to both jurisdictions. That's right. Thank you very much for that. You're completely right. We do need to work on that adjustment, which is why I emphasize so much on the companies that do report and others that don't. And it could happen that a company from the food and beverage industry would discharge wastewater and they report under waste, but they're not considering, or they would report under water, but they're not compelled to do so under all other impacted areas. We do need to make that adjustment. We have time for one more question in the room. We have another one online that says, thank you for the presentation. What happens if chemical releases surpass the thresholds or limitations and pollute the rivers as the Sonora River? Can you present any claims to the agencies that take care of the environment, or have you seen any situations where the impacted communities report this? Right, the mechanism does exist to do so, and it has been legitimized where citizens can make these reports, and Profepa, together with CONAGUA and Semarnat, can act together to conduct monitoring of these companies. A lot of the practices of this sort are actually based on these areas where we've spotted that we have potential pollution of substances. And we have these projects in the pipeline that first and foremost involve an environmental inspection. Alejandro, right, just one additional comment. Regarding that question about river pollution, as Zaida mentioned, it is valid and legitimate to report, but remember that we receive these reports 1 year later, and that would mean it's too late then to actually do something. It's not too late, but it's too long after the possible impact on the communities, the soil, the water, etc. So just keep that in mind. Regardless of that caveat, it is possible to report. Sometimes these are classified as incidents or accidents, and they pollute rivers like the Sonora River, and we received that report the next period, the next term. We don't get that information immediately.
Gracias. Estoy viendo este uso de datos del red para el sector gobierno y cómo
the use of
fortalecer la
data
toma de
from the REDSE
decisiones.
for government
todo el
and
día
how
no
to
he oído
strengthen
nada que
decision
fortalezca la
making. I
salud de
haven't
las
heard
comunidades y tiene
anything
mucho que
throughout
ver
the
con
day
emisiones.
to
O sea,
protect and strengthen
este sector que
community
estamos
health.
no
And that
gubernamental
relates
estamos muy
to
preocupados
emissions
por
or
esto.
releases, and the
Y la verdad
non-government
que estos
sector
datos nos
is
sirven
extremely concerned
muchísimo
over
porque
this.
no
This
tenemos
data
ninguna
is really helpful for us.
análisis de
It's
los
very
datos
useful,
del red en la
but we do not
plataforma.
have any
Entonces,
data
primera
analysis of the
pregunta
REDSE on the
sería si
platform.
podemos
My first
acceder
question
a
is
todos
if
estos
we could have
documentos que
access to
están
all these
diciendo para
documents
conocer cuáles son
that
los
you've
sectores que
mentioned
más
to
reportan
actually learn
inconsistencias. Queremos saber
which
cuáles son. Queremos saber
sectors report
cuáles
the
son
most
esas
inconsistencies.
sustancias
We
que
want to
estás
know
diciendo que por
what
región
are these
han estado
industries, what
impactando más.
substances
Entonces,
these are.
realmente ese
As
tipo
you
de
mentioned, the different
información no
regions
solo le
where
sirve
they
al
have the largest
gobierno, sino que
impact. And that
también le sirve a
information,
las
again, is
comunidades
not
como
just
para
useful for
saber
the
qué es lo
government,
que está
but for the
pasando
communities to
en el
learn
terreno y ver
about what is
qué
happening
trabajo de justicia
in
ambiental
their
se tiene que
area and
hacer.
what sort of
Entonces,
environmental
esto
justice needs to take
que sí
place.
quisiéramos, si es
So
información para el
we would
gobierno, es
like to have
información
that
pública, que nos
information
comparta
publicly
de
available
todos
if it
estos
is
análisis, porque es
public.
parte de lo que hemos
Because
venido diciendo
those
durante
analyses are
muchos años,
part
que es
of
lo
what
que le
we've
hace
been
falta al RED.
fighting
¿Para
for.
qué nos
That's
está
what the red
sirviendo?
still
Aquí estamos
needs.
oyendo cómo van a
We're
economizar, cómo
And
los
we've heard about
materiales,
how
cómo
to
generar menos
economize, save on
residuos, pero
material,
es
how to
en base
generate
al
less
asunto
waste,
económico
but that's
más que a los
based on
impactos a la salud y
economics
al
rather
ambiente.
than the
Entonces,
impact
nada más
on
dejarlo
human
así,
health
Zaira,
and the
y ver si podemos
environment.
tener acceso a
That's
esa
all, Saida,
información y
and I
sí
hope
queremos
we
saber
can
cuáles
have
son esos
access to
sectores
that
más
information, and we
inconsistentes.
would
Creo
like
que
to
uno de
know what
esos
those
en
sectors
las
are with the
últimas revisadas
highest
que hicimos fue
inconsistencies. I
hidrocarburos.
think in one of our
Entonces,
latest reviews, it was the
por ahí anda industria
hydrocarbons
cementera y sobre todo industria
industry, and of
minera
course,
y que son
cement
los
and mining and
los
so
reportes
forth.
que son
And
como
they're
los
the
más
ones
que impactan a las
that
comunidades.
have
Entonces era eso.
the worst impacts on the communities.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, en el caso
Thank
de los
you.
registros inconsistentes, hoy
When
en
it
día
comes
en el
to
portal de REDS hay
inconsistent
un apartado en
reports,
donde
the RETSE
están inconsistentes, pero
website
más allá
has
de que estén como
a
tal reportados,
section for those
también
inconsistencies,
aquellos registros que
and
son
beyond
consistentes,
reporting them,
pues también y
the
que
ones
son
that are
para nosotros desde
consistent,
nuestro punto de vista de análisis, que
that
son,
that
que
require
reflejan un
analysis
poco
from
más
our point
la
of
realidad
view,
de la empresa
that
o
also
que realmente
reflect the
están
reality of the
por el equipo
companies,
están acordes
and
con la producción,
that
con las
the
emisiones.
team
En este
determines
caso,
that they
sí se tienen este
to
tipo
match the
de
production and
información. Esta
emissions. For
información
that,
sí
we
es
have the
pública.
information
Quizá,
publicly
como
available.
bien comentaba también en algunos momentos en la mesa,
And
hay información que
as
puede
we
ser por el
heard
tema
earlier, there
de
could be
secrecía,
some
puede
information
omitirse, pero hay alguna otra información
that
que
could
genera estos
be
diagnósticos que les digo.
omitted for
Para
whatever
estos diagnósticos
reason.
no
We
necesitas,
do have
digamos, datos que son sensibles, que sí se pueden
data that
generar
is not
este tipo de
sensitive,
análisis
that
por
gives way
regiones,
to
por
these
estados,
analyses
y
that
que puede
can
ser
be
disponible, ¿no? O sea, al final del
for
día
a
la
region
respuesta
or for a
existe.
state and so forth, but yes, they are available.
Bueno, Alejandro y José Manuel.
Alejandro,
Y tenemos que seguir.
and then we need to move
Muchas
on.
gracias. Zaira, pues realmente muy
Thank you,
interesante.
Saida.
Yo lo que
It's
quisiera decir es que
this is all
como
very
asociación,
interesting. As
en
an
este caso de la industria del automóvil, le ofrecemos el apoyo
association
de
of the
nosotros
automotive
para dar esa
industry,
revisión.
please know that you
Recientemente
have our
estuve con
support for those
CONUE
reviews.
y algo que
I was
le
recently
platicaba
with
yo es
the
que
CONUE,
nos gustaría ver unificados los
and I told them
reportes,
that we would like to
porque de
see
esa
the
manera
report
es
unified.
una sola inversión de
That would
información
make it
y ya
as
todos
one
tienen
single outpour
la
of
misma base de
information,
datos.
and we would all be able to
Igualmente,
use
nos
the same
gustaría ver cada
database.
vez mejor el reporte,
Also, we
más
would like to see
confiable,
the
más
report
robusto, más
improve,
útil
become more
para todos los que
reliable,
tenemos que tomar
robust,
decisiones
and
con
useful
ello
for all of us who need
y
to use
desde
that
luego
for our
también
decision
aprender de
making,
lo que nosotros
and
vimos
also
en
to
estos
learn from
momentos.
what we've
Canadá
seen
con
just now,
su prevención de la
what
contaminación,
we've
Estados Unidos
seen
también,
Canada and
prevención
the
de la
United
contaminación,
States are doing in
el
terms of
intercambio de
pollution
información, el
prevention,
benchmarking,
that
darle
benchmarking
para
work,
adelante con el manejo
the
integral
exchange of
de los
information, and move
materiales,
forward.
etcétera, y tal vez dejar muy en claro el marco legal
And
bajo el cual
perhaps really
estamos
clarify the
actuando.
legal
Desde
framework
el
under which we
principio
are
me tocó
acting.
participar en la elaboración de la LAO,
From
de
the
la
start,
COA, de la
I
PRT,
was able to be a
y
part
desde el
of the
principio
teams that
quedaron
worked on
por
the
ahí algunas
COA
lagunas
and
que me
the
gustaría pues,
initial
platicar con ustedes. Entonces, con
environmental
mucho gusto
license
y
and
encantado
so
de
forth. But
participar.
there are gaps that we have been dragging since then, and I would love to work with you on that.
Sí, nada más un comentario sobre eso, ¿no? Muchas gracias, Alex. Yo creo que
Another
todos los
comment on
comentarios y
that.
cosas,
Thank you very much,
y
Alex.
viniendo de gente
All
como
comments,
el
of
grupo
course,
original,
coming
vamos a
from
que hizo todo esto
let's say
son
the original
bienvenidos
group
y
that
nos van a
worked on
servir mucho
this
para
are more than welcome and will be
mejorar
very useful
muchísimo lo que
for
tenemos.
us to
Nada más quería
improve
yo
on what we
comentar
have. I just wanted to
al
mention
respecto que
to that
pues todo
regard that
lo que se hace aquí de la
everything that we're doing
del
here,
RETSE, pues
the
tiene,
work with the RETSE,
vamos, un uso muy grande. Y en el caso que comentaste tú de CONUE,
is for
en el
very
caso de la, cuando se
extensive
hizo la COA,
use. And what you've mentioned about when the COA was created, you're very right. There are gaps, and we also need that unification. Part of the support or the basis for the COA was to reduce the number of reports, and I think that's what you mean. In the COA, there are some fields that have been disabled. They cannot be enabled because it is a regulatory problem. At the time, there was no time with all the regulatory changes that were required to justify that requirement of additional information and that needed to be in the COA. Now, that wasn't ready. The COA couldn't wait any longer. We had to go live with it. We agreed with CONUE to disable those fields. They've attempted to take that project back up so we can enable the fields, but there have been different iterations, and there's not one final version that at a given time wouldn't also mean that we would have to change the format of the COA. If we add a small box, it's not just a small box. Every small box that we have there, and it's 444, if I remember correctly, they all need to be legally supported. Otherwise, we cannot request that information. That's the case for Mexico. If we add a single box, we need to restart the whole process to even republish the new format with the additional box and make it legally viable. It's not just, well, I'm inspired today, I'm going to add 5 boxes or remove 3. But thank you for mentioning that. It is very important. Sergio's working with the CONUE, looking into that. So just remind them when you see us that they have disabled fields. I've talked to Israel, and they have all the will to work on this. It's just a matter of talking about that again. I'm working weekly with them, so we're happy to participate. One last question in the room. This goes hand in hand with the question that came from online. When you have water discharges that exceed the thresholds marked by CONAGUA, do you have any actions foreseen by or provided by Semarnat, even if the situation happened a year before? We have to focus on what we're discussing. This is preventive measures. And a company would say, I'm issuing a lot more than I should, and I'm going to do something about it. Or will Semarnat say, you're breaking the law, you need to fix this? Does that happen? Well, remember that the standards that regulate water discharge are mostly overseen by CONAGUA, the National Water Commission, and the states. And CONAGUA has its own compliance reporting portal, and that is its main function, to identify the companies that, depending on their own licenses and permits, they are exceeding these values, these numbers. So with CONAGUA's help, we notify these situations or the other way around, but it is CONAGUA who applies the protocols. We also have the accompaniment of PROFEPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and together with CONAGUA in their corresponding fields and powers, they make their own investigations. Now, the human resource, of course, is not enough to monitor all the industries, but we do have these programs that are planned at the start of the year for those interventions.
Muchas gracias, Zaira. Y bueno, vamos a continuar ahora.
Thank you very
Quedan
much,
unas
Saida.
preguntas en
We have
línea
a few
y
questions
les voy a
still
pedir a los
online,
colegas de la
so I will
Soledad si
ask
pueden
our
atender a
colleagues
Wilson
to please help
específicamente
us by answering those
para el RECE.
specifically for the
Pasamos
REDSE.
entonces a la última ponencia
Let's go to the
del día de hoy,
last
antes de la discusión
presentation of
final.
our day, or our last
Usos y personas
discussion.
usuarias de los datos de prevención de la
Users
contaminación,
and uses
perspectiva
of
de las ONGs
pollution prevention
ambientales,
data, the
por John
environmental
Jackson,
NGOs
desde la red
perspectives
de ecorregión de los
by John
Grandes
Jackson
Lagos.
from the Great Lakes ecoregion.
Well, I didn't want the people on the line to hear that about free dinner. Oh, good. Okay. Anyway, let's go on. I want to, it's really important to be aware of the people who are working out in the communities, in the not-for-profit organizations and the part of with their community groups or working provincially, state, nationally in terms of trying to make changes to work for the rest of us, and that's really the perspective here that's coming forward. Myself, I'll very quickly flip over that, but I do want to point out one thing because of something Crispin said this morning, where he talked about the multi-stakeholder committee that is in the Canadian National Pollutant Release Inventory process. And I have to say it's a really excellent process. We have, for example, very, very structured, and I don't know if the people are still in line that may be members of it from Canada. Anna used to be a member of it. And we and the committee they've set up, and they've been very careful to structure it. It has industry and Indigenous people and so on it, but they've been very careful to allocate that a third of the people on the committee need to be from the Anglo community and from civil society. And it's been a really important component of it. The other thing that's been really important in making it work is that they've put money into it in terms of expenses, travel plans. There's not as much travel as there used to be. We now usually have one meeting a year in person, but that they pay those for other people. But the other thing that they've added in recognition of the real knowledge that these groups bring to the table is money to help us to pay to do research ourselves, to bring forward new proposals and new ideas to the table, to review proposals that have already been made. It doesn't begin to pay the amount of time and so on we put into it, but it's an incredibly important contribution and an incredibly important statement of valuing the organization. And I really urge the other countries to look at that, and I urge Canada to make sure nothing happens to slip back from it. Anyway, we'll slip on to the topic. Pollution prevention. And this, in our minds, is a core problem in the terms of the ways in which all three countries are actually dealing with the issue. The difference between pollution prevention and pollution control. And it's just not good enough the way we are doing it now that it's not separated. To quickly describe it, pollution prevention means avoiding contamination of the environment by not using or creating toxic substance in the first place. That's very different. And so it's things like redesigning the product and the processes so you don't need toxic substances, or it's putting non-toxic substances in for toxic substances. The core thing of elimination, getting it out of the system. Unfortunately, they're still getting that stuff out in the environment, which we have to work in different ways to get that back. But at least we're not putting out more, and it has to be our goal. Reporting PRTRs usually uses a much broader definition of pollution prevention to include pollution control. We're not saying pollution control isn't essential. It is essential. We're not saying that it's not important. It is absolutely important. but it is also important that we present them and define them separately. So let me hear, this is something from the International Joint Commission and the virtual elimination. Right? It's an older report, is it in the 80s? I can't see the number at the end of here. But it says, even after an injury has been established, the traditional focus has been on management and control of releases rather than prevention. And that's still so true today. Pollution control reactively addresses the problem once the substances have been generated or used, and prevention attempts to avoid that use or generation and avoid that. So it's a core principle that's in our minds. And again, I want to stress that we're not saying don't do pollution control reporting as well. We are, but they need to be reported separately. And this is an example of sort of the types of target substances that we have, and it's quite a broader range all the time in terms of something that in very low quantities can have serious impacts on people and wildlife. Things that are being emitted from a lot of facilities, and maybe it's in small quantities, but when they add up and accumulate, they have a huge impact. A current one is PFAS, and we're all working on getting it put on the system, but the people, it's like it's everywhere. That means we can't get getting more out of there, and the data is showing that it's having impacts at very small quantities. So those sorts of substances, and there's a lot of them, and unfortunately an increasing number of them that we have to really be concerned about. I think that Kristen showed this slide this morning, so I will slip through it fairly quickly, but I just want to point out that the way that we currently report on pollution control and pollution prevention leads to some conclusions that I'm not saying manipulate, that's not done deliberately, but that get the vision and the picture different from what it really is. You look at this, and this says activities, perceptions, etc. And it says, okay, where are most of the activities happening? But they go out as coming under pollution prevention. They say this, and it's coming from these, and wonderful job on them. But you look at the bottom three, which are not pollution prevention, they're pollution control. And that's the overwhelming numbers. So when you put out the data that says, 80% of activities or whatever, it's a great thing. It's distorting the picture. And the other one is, and this was another one I think Kristen may have showed it this morning as well, but this is doing it by the types of substances and again, it's the methods. And if you look at the methods there, you find that it's the tiny little ones that are pollution prevention methods. And again, it conveys a message which just is not accurate in terms of how good of a job we're doing. So if we need to start presenting in our PRTR programs, the pollution prevention part separately from the pollution control part. And it means, for example, that the form that industries fill out, there's a pollution control part, a pollution prevention part. There's also a separate pollution control part. And that each needs to start with a definition by the governments of what pollution prevention is and what needs to go instead to that, and be reporting on them separately. So that's our beginning recommendation, is to, again, if you look at this, and it's the same data, but 20% of the so-called P2 activities on substance, well, almost 80% would be considered pollution control methods. But that distinction isn't made when it's presented to the public. So let me look here at our recommendation then on this one. And it is that we need to report pollution prevention and control separately. And it also should be a reporting on if we're looking at a particular substance. Again, separately, maybe there's some control actions that are happening on the substance and prevention actions happening on the substance. So that would be reported on twice by the industry, once under pollution prevention, once under control method. And the form has to be very clear in laying those out. Why is pollution prevention and that distinction in pollution prevention really important to us as people working in the communities? And the sort of main things are that to really solve the problems, or some of the problems in our communities, some substances just have to stop getting out. We simply can't risk putting out certain toxic substances anymore. And the pollution prevention activities help us as community members to know which companies are doing a good job on it, which companies aren't doing a good job on it, that are in our community. And that, we might want to go in and rap on their door and visit them. Or which are ones that it's an indicator to us that, hey, government's actually not doing a very good job on the pollution prevention aspect of these substances. Therefore, we may want to rap on their door and say, hey, you need to change some of the rules, et cetera, and make that happen. So that's the sort of why it matters to us. So what we did in this study, and Fady Leon from the Canadian Environmental Law Association, I don't know if she's still on the phone after all these hours, but anyway, if she is our incredible expert in terms of the use of the NPRI website. I'm pitifully poor in comparison, but we all have, and she's amazing on it. So I put together these list of questions, and there's more than one page of them, of information that it's important for us to have in order to be able to bring forward the pressures, et cetera, that are needed to achieve our goals. And she spent, and I know I'm not exaggerating, she's a very determined person. She spent about at least 50 hours on the website over several weeks, because she couldn't handle that many hours at once on the site, over several weeks. And the questions that we put to her, it was just overwhelmingly a frustration, and that it isn't good enough. I won't go through all of these questions, but I really urge you, because I think it applies to all three countries. And I don't know the US system, I don't know the Mexican system, but I suspect there's some similar problems here, and I suspect that the needs have similarities. Prime one, is the information easily accessible to the public? Oh yeah, you can get it on there, but boy, it can be really hard to get to it. Is it easy to manipulate the data, to carry out analyses and evaluations? Again, has to be a prime thing that we're looking at in the use of PRTRs. Can the public obtain the P2 information separately from the pollution control information? The recommendation we had just made, I won't explain it further. Does a facility have a P2 plan? And I'll use the Canadian example, and Kristen, we've talked about it. It's no surprise to everyone I'm saying this, but in the Canadian system, for example, most of the questions aren't required. A required question is, do you have a P2 plan? But it doesn't require you to say what's in it. Is it good enough? Who knows? Or what substances that it's there for? And that's the sort of information we need. And also, they should provide a link to the P2 plan so that you can go and look at the company and see what sorts of things they're planning to do in the P2 plan. And again, for us to make some judgments about whether it's good enough or not. Does the facility provide data on progress towards achieving the P2 goals? And I heard that being discussed just in our last discussion. Is it making progress? And the critical thing here again is reporting needs to be by substance. It's not to say, yes, we reduced toxics by a certain percentage. Which toxics was it? And to be specific in naming that. So a really important component. A few more questions here. A few more questions. You can see that poor Faye got pushed into a lot of work in this. She loves it. She loves being on the website. So for each substance is the information provided. So for example, it needs to report it for the specific substances that you did the plan for. And likewise under pollution control ones. The questions, the other side of questions, you need to be again saying which items were we solving by the pollution control methods. And can you tell from the data have had much impact? If the activity was substitution, and there was just discussion of that, I was pleased to hear in this room here, what substance replaced it? That's an essential piece of information to be in the P2 plan, is that you need to report what you placed it with. And that becomes a warning sign for governments and for us to look at that and say, well, is that going to become a problem again? You know, we know all these things, the flame retardants that we banned and replaced with another flame retardant that now we're banning. And that happens all the time, you know, the unfortunate substitutions. So that can be a warning. We need to look at that and say, does that look like an unfortunate substitution or not? And I think it may have been Orlando that raised the question of, should that be a substance that starts being on NPRI? And I think what it needs to be is that if it isn't on NPRI, we need to keep an eye on it to see if the use of that substance is starting to increase to the point that it needs to be on NPRI. Process changes again, what the process is, where is it available each separate? Is information available for each facility separately? And that's really one of the great things about PRTR is that it's individual facilities for everything, which is so important. So I'm pleased to see that they're all like that. Is the information available cumulatively for all facilities? So is it easy to do the analysis so we can look at one industry and say, hey, there's a problem here. Or hey, there's companies in that industry that are doing a great job in PT, and others that may not be. Or are there a lot of small companies? And again, that cumulative impact with the community or the region. Is the information available over a range of years so we can see the changes? And one of the things I know we ran into in looking at the Canadian website is the company would often say, what did you do under the plan? Do you have a plan? Yes. What did you do under the plan? Nothing this year. And it doesn't refer you back to how many years do I need to going back through the PRTR information to try to figure out what they were doing and what, you know, that doesn't help me at all. And the substance again, search for all facilities for specific substance, possibly an overall analysis that shows which P2 activities were most effective. And that's a really important lesson that we can learn and government can learn, et cetera, and companies can learn, industry can learn from seeing the information that they give in terms of what was the activity that they did to get the PT activity and how much did it reduce the stuff by. That's a real learning exercise for all of us. So almost done, but that's this question we went through. And unfortunately, the sad thing, and no one was more frustrated than Faye, even though, as I said, she loves working on the website. But it's such a limitations in terms of it. But there are two sort of issues I want to just push for as recommendations. All detailed information listed above in those questions should be required, not encouraged. And again, as I said, I don't know the Mexican system or the US system, but as you look at the Canadian system, there's only a few questions they're required to answer. The other is we encourage. And I remember last year, the PRTR, the NPRI in Canada changed a couple of questions to get some more information required, but in the explanation they gave out, and in return, we'll switch a couple of the other questions to not encouraged because burden on industry drives us crazy. But anyway, but anyway, that's list there. I've shown it to you. And the final thing again is just pollution prevention, pollution control should be reported separately to the PRTRs just because of the nature of them. And that's it. And there's a link there to the website where the full report behind this is. And Faye De Leon from the Canadian Environmental Law Association, I just wanted to acknowledge the work she had done on this. And I'm pleased to see also that as they were talking this morning about the work plan for the coming year in the 3 years in Canada, that pollution prevention is on it in terms of making improvements. So we're pleased to see that. So that's it.
Any questions for John?
My translator's on.
Luis?
Just to recognize excellent approach, John. Thinks it's very useful for, at least for the Mexican needs. Certainly it is. So yeah, we will. I think it will be important to convey some of the success stories and reporting difference between pollution control and pollution prevention, because depending on the sector, you can find some specific outcomes. But I think, yeah, it's very nice to underline this. So congratulations.
You need more detail on it. If you need more detail on it, as I said, the report has more detail, or if you want to chat with us or whatever, we'd be thrilled to do that.
Any other last questions? No? Okay. Then, by the way, Fede Leon was still online, so. And yeah. All right. Well, as you know, we are quite behind on the schedule, but so we have one more item that we're going to explain and then continue with it tomorrow because we'll have more time to discuss this, and is the second phase of the pollution prevention challenge. And Daniel.
Yeah, so just very briefly, I don't think that we have time to to really discuss it this afternoon. We will have some time tomorrow because we've left the last session really for more of an open discussion. But we really would like, we've heard some very interesting things this afternoon, and the pollution prevention challenge, as you know, we've sort of done as a pilot project, looking at the pollution prevention data from the automotive manufacturing sector and supply chain. We have this year left to sort of finish looking at the data. Maybe there will be other activities in the future, but for this year, we thought that we would like to engage people who are interested in people from the sector, NGOs, industry, people working with data, on seeing how we could better improve the information. We've heard things about how information needs to be accessible. Maybe that sharing of information within the industry, within decision makers, to really sort of make the information useful. So, I'd just like you to think about that maybe, and we'll have some chance to talk about it tomorrow. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. And well, for those of you, there's some people may not be here tomorrow, so you can still write to us about your reflections on the meeting. We also have a quick survey about the meeting. We're going to share the QR code here, and also with those who join us online. We're very appreciative that a lot of people stay until the end. We had actually over 130 people today online, which is really good. And tomorrow, well, we have quite a bit to say today. I think at the end, I just want to say that thank you, everybody, for participating, for being here online, in person. And as you can see, I mean, we're behind not because of meeting management skills, but more of the discussion has been quite fruitful and engaging. So we're happy for that. And with that, I think we're going to have a group picture over here. And thank you very much. And tomorrow we start at 9 o'clock again. Es Mexico time. Muchas gracias a todos. Mañana comenzamos a las 9 de la mañana. Y bueno,
So we will start tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we're going to have a group picture taken on this side of the room. Thank you very much to the interpreters and thank you to the technical team and also the CEC staff for supporting us in the organization of this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.